No one believed the ranch was hers until a quiet cowboy found the truth. Lydia Mae Whitaker stood in the cold dawn with flour still dusting one sleeve and mud drying on the hem of her brown dress, watching three men argue over a broken gate she had already fixed in her mind. "It needs a new hinge," she said quietly. No one turned. The foreman, Buck Larkin, kicked at the sagging gate and spat into the dirt. "Post is weak." "It is not the post," Lydia said. "The hinge pin is bent. If you pull it free and turn the gate half an inch east, it will hold through winter." Buck looked over his shoulder then, not at her face, but at the bucket in her hand and the apron tied over her dress. "You best see to breakfast, Miss Lydia. Men get cross when biscuits turn cold." The other hands laughed softly, not cruel enough for anyone to call it cruelty, but sharp enough to leave a mark. Lydia said nothing. She had learned long ago that a woman could waste her whole life trying to prove she had spoken. Instead, she set the bucket down by the porch, walked to the gate, took hold of the iron hinge with both hands, and pulled. The pin shifted with a dry scrape. The gate lifted half an inch and swung clean. The laughter stopped. Buck's jaw tightened. Lucky guess. Lydia wiped her hands on her apron. "Then I have been lucky every day for 6 years. From the far side of the yard, a horse gave a low snort. That was when she noticed the stranger. He sat tall on a bay gelding near the cottonwood tree, his black hat shadowing most of his face. He had ridden in so quietly that even the dogs had not barked. His coat was worn at the cuffs, his boots dusty from distance, and a bedroll was tied behind his saddle. He looked like a man who had crossed too much country to be impressed by noise. But his eyes were on Lydia, not on Buck, not on the broken gate, not on the white ranch house with its green shutters and proud porch. On Lydia, as if he had seen the whole thing and understood more than anyone had meant to show him. She looked away first, though it stung her pride to do it. "Who are you?" Buck called. The stranger dismounted slowly. "Elias Wade." "Business. I came to speak with Mr. Granger about cattle." At the name Granger, Lydia's hands curled before she could stop them. The ranch was called Rose Finch Ranch now, because Amos Granger had changed the sign the year after her father died. But Lydia still saw the old name beneath the paint whenever she passed the front gate. Whitaker Ridge. Her father had carved those letters himself. She had been 14 then, standing beside him with a lantern, holding the nails in her apron pocket. Now the sign bore another man's name, and Lydia slept in the small back room beside the pantry like a servant in the house. Her mother had chosen curtains for "Mr. Granger ain't up yet." "Buck said he don't see buyers before noon." Elias Wade glanced at the pale sky. "That gives me time to look around." "No, it don't." Lydia picked up the bucket again. "The south herd is not ready for sale." Buck turned on her. "Nobody asked you." "The heifers have been losing weight." She said there is bitterweed near the low creek. "I told Amos last week." Buck's face darkened. "You told Mr. Granger a lot of things, most of them above your place." The yard went still. Lydia felt the old familiar cold move through her, colder than weather. "Above your place." She had heard those words in a dozen forms. At the bank. At the land office. At her father's funeral. When men spoke around her like she was a chair in the room. From Amos Granger himself when he brought papers stamped and sealed, saying her father had signed away the ranch before he died. She had been 20 then. She was 26 now. 6 years of cooking, mending, keeping accounts, doctoring horses, reading the sky, stretching feed, soothing hired hands, and saving a ranch that no longer carried her name. 6 years of watching Amos Granger ride into Mercy Crossing and take praise for every smart choice she made before sunrise. Elias Wade stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said. "How do you know it is bitterweed?" Buck scoffed. "Don't encourage her." Lydia met the stranger's gaze. His voice held no mockery. That alone made her careful. "The cows avoid the west grass, though it is fuller," she said. "Their mouths are dry, their coats are dull. 2 calves stumbled yesterday. The creek bend has yellow bloom near the stones. Bitterweed grows there when autumn frost comes late. Elias nodded once. That would do it. Buck stared at him. You taking her word? I am taking the evidence, Elias said. Something in Lydia's chest pulled tight. Before Buck could answer, the front door opened. Amos Granger stepped onto the porch in his dark vest, silver watch chain shining against his middle. He was a broad man, with soft hands and hard eyes, the kind of man who smiled only when witnesses were present. He looked at Elias first, then Buck, then Lydia. His smile vanished when he saw the gate standing straight. What happened here? Gate hinge was bent. Elias said, Miss Whitaker said it right. Amos's eyes cut to Lydia. Not with thanks. Never with thanks. With warning, she has a habit of meddling. Amos said, You must be Wade. Yes, sir. Come in. Coffee's hot. It can wait, Elias said. I would like to see the south herd first. Amos's smile twitched. No need. Buck will show you the best stock. I want to see the herd near the low creek. Silence fell again, deeper this time. Lydia looked down at the bucket handle biting into her palm. She should not feel hope over one stranger asking one simple thing. Hope had cost her too much already. Hope had kept her on this land when common sense told her to go. Hope had made her hide her father's old ledger under a loose board beneath her bed, waiting for the day when someone might care that the numbers in it did not match the deed Amos had used to take everything. But Elias Wade had looked at her like her words had weight. That was dangerous. Amos came down the porch steps slowly. Mr. Wade, you came to buy cattle, not take lessons from my kitchen girl. Lydia's face did not change, but inside something flinched. Elias turned his head toward her. Not with pity. She could have borne anger better than pity. But there was no pity in his eyes. Only a quiet, steady respect that felt stranger than kindness. She is not wrong about the bitter weed, he said. Amos stopped walking. And if she has been keeping this place from falling apart, Elias continued, then I reckon calling her a kitchen girl says more about you than it does about her. The wind moved through the yard. A loose shutter tapped once against the house. Buck took a step back. Lydia forgot to breathe. Amos Granger's face flushed dark, but before he could speak, a young hand named Toby ran from the barn, hat clutched in one hand. Mr. Granger, he called, breathless. There's a man at the road. Says he's from the county office. Amos stiffened. Lydia saw it. So did Elias. What does he want? Amos snapped. Toby swallowed. He says he has questions about the old Whitaker deed. The bucket slipped from Lydia's hand and hit the dirt with a hollow thud. Amos looked at her then, truly looked. And for the first time in 6 years, Lydia saw fear pass across his face. Elias Wade saw it too. And in that cold morning yard, with flour on her sleeve and her father's hidden ledger waiting beneath the floorboards, Lydia understood that the quiet life she had been forced to live was about to split wide open. The county man stood just beyond the open gate with a leather satchel in one hand and dust on the knees of his trousers, looking at Rose Finch Ranch as if it had already become a question in his mind. He was not young. His beard was trimmed close, his coat was plain, and his eyes were tired in the way of a man who had spent too many years reading papers that ruined lives. Lydia knew his kind from the land office in Mercy Crossing. Men who did not shout. Men who did not need to. Their power sat folded in documents and ink. Amos Granger moved first. Mr. Bell, he called, forcing warmth into his voice. This is unexpected. The county man removed his hat. Morning, Mr. Granger. Lydia noticed the way Amos's hand brushed his watch chain. He did that when he was unsettled. 6 years of serving his breakfast had taught her more about his fears than he knew. Elias Wade stood a few feet from Lydia, quiet as a fence post, but nothing about him seemed idle. His gaze passed from Amos to Mr. Bell, then to Lydia, and there it rested for one heartbeat. Not long enough for others to notice, long enough for her to feel steadied by it. Amos stepped into the yard. What brings you all this way? Mr. Bell opened his satchel. A review has been requested on several deed transfers filed between 1877 and 1879. Lydia's fingers tightened around her skirt, requested by whom Amos asked the county registrar. So Amos smiled, but it had no ease in it, and my ranch is part of this review. The former Whitaker Ridge property is the name moved through the yard like a match struck in darkness. Former. Lydia heard Buck shift his boots behind her. Toby stared at the ground. Even the horses near the fence seemed still. Amos laughed once, too loudly. There is no former about it. This is Rose Finch Ranch. Has been for years. Papers are settled. So I was told. Mr. Bell said. Still, I need to confirm a few points. You may confirm them in town. I was instructed to confirm them here. Amos's mouth tightened. Lydia had spent 6 years watching him control rooms. He knew how to charm shopkeepers, flatter bankers, and make hired men feel grateful for wages paid late. But that morning, under the pale sun, standing before a county officer and a stranger who had already questioned him once, he looked less like a ranch owner and more like a man trying to keep a blanket over a fire. Miss Whitaker, Mr. Bell said. Her name startled her. Amos turned sharply. She has nothing to do with this. I believe she does. Lydia could feel every eye in the yard move to her. She folded her hands in front of her apron, the same way she did when Amos criticized the accounts or told guests she was only there out of family pity. Yes, sir, she said. Mr. Bell came closer, but not too close. You are the daughter of Henry Whitaker? I am, and you resided on this property at the time of his passing. I was born here. The words came out softly, but the truth in them stood tall. Mr. Bell nodded. Do you have any personal papers belonging to your father? Amos's head snapped toward her. There it was, the fear again, quick and bright before he covered it. Lydia saw Elias. Notice I have a few letters, Lydia said carefully. Sentimental scraps. Amos said, nothing legal, mister. Bell did not look at him. Letters can sometimes assist with handwriting comparison. The yard seemed to tilt beneath Lydia's feet. For 6 years, her father's letters had lived under a loose floorboard beside a ledger wrapped in blue cloth. She had taken them out at night when the house slept. She had traced the shape of his name by lantern light, the strong H, the looping W. The way the tail of the R always leaned slightly upward. She knew the signature on Amos's deed was wrong. She had known it from the first moment she saw it. But knowing and proving were two different roads, and she had been left barefoot at the start of both. Amos smiled again. Colder now. Mr. Bell, I think you are troubling a woman who does not understand business matters. Elias spoke before Lydia could. She understood bitterweed before anyone else in this yard did. Amos turned on him. This is not your affair. I came to buy cattle. Elias said, I am starting to wonder what else is being sold here. The words were not loud, but they cut clean. Mr. Bell closed his satchel. I will return tomorrow afternoon, Miss Whitaker. If you have those letters, I ask that you make them available. Amos stepped forward. You will bring any request through me. Mr. Bell finally looked at him. No, Mr. Granger. In this matter, I will speak with Miss Whitaker directly. For a moment, Lydia thought Amos might strike him with words, if nothing else. But he only stood there, red-faced and still, while Mr. Bell put on his hat and walked back toward the road. No one moved until the county man was gone. Then Amos turned inside. He said to Lydia. The word cracked like a whip. Lydia did not move at first. Her legs felt rooted to the dirt of the yard, the dirt her father had once knelt in to plant the first apple tree by the kitchen window. She felt Elias beside her, not touching, not stepping in front of her, not making himself a shield she had not asked for. Just there. It mattered more than it should have. I have breakfast to finish, Lydia said. Amos stared at her. Inside, now she looked at the men in the yard. Buck would not meet her eyes. Toby looked frightened. Elias watched her with quiet attention, as if whatever she chose would be respected because it was hers to choose. At last, Lydia walked toward the house. The kitchen smelled of coffee, ashes, and rising bread. Sunlight came through the window and showed every worn place on the table, every scratch left by years of work. Amos shut the door behind them. What papers do you have? He demanded. Lydia reached for the bread dough and pressed her floury hands into it. You heard, Mr. Bell. Letters. What else? She folded the dough, turned it, pressed again. If you knew there was nothing wrong with the deed, you would not be asking like that." His face changed. It was small, but she saw it. "You watch your tone," he said. "I have watched my tone for 6 years." The words surprised them both. Outside, a horse shifted near the porch. A low creak of leather followed. Elias had not gone far. Amos lowered his voice. "You think a few old letters will change anything? This ranch is mine. The bank knows it. The county knows it. Every man in Mercy Crossing knows it." Lydia looked at him then. "My father knew it was mine." Amos's hand curled on the back of a chair. For a heartbeat, the old fear rose in her. Not fear that he would hurt her badly, but fear of what came after defiance. The closed doors, the missing wages, the sharp little punishments that left no bruise but stole breath just the same. Then she remembered the gate swinging straight after every man had said it could not. She remembered Elias Wade saying, quote, "I am taking the evidence." And she remembered the loose board beneath her bed. Amos leaned closer. "You will give me those letters." Lydia turned back to the dough. "No," she said. The word was so small it should not have filled the kitchen, but it did. Amos stared at her as if he had never seen her before. Maybe he had not. Maybe for 6 years he had seen only the woman who cooked, counted, mended, and endured. Maybe he had never once considered that silence could be a locked door rather than an empty room. Before he could speak again, Elias knocked once on the kitchen door and opened it halfway. "Pardon?" he said. "Mr. Granger, your foreman says the south herd is drifting toward the creek. If that bitter weed is as bad as Miss Whitaker says, you may want to move them before you lose more than a sale." Amos looked from Elias to Lydia, trapped between anger and money. Money won. He pushed past Elias and stormed into the yard. Lydia stood at the table with flour on her hands and her pulse beating hard in her throat. Elias remained by the open door, hat in hand, careful not to step over the threshold without permission. After a quiet moment, he said, "Do you have somewhere safe for those letters?" Lydia looked toward the narrow hall that led to her room. "I thought I did," she said. Elias's eyes followed her glance, then returned to her face. "Then before sundown," he said gently, "we had better make sure Lydia kept kneading the bread long after the dough was ready, because her hands needed something to do besides tremble." She did not want Elias Wade to see that. She did not want any man to see that. For 6 years, men had mistaken her quiet for weakness, and she had paid for that mistake in small daily ways. But trembling was not weakness. Her father had told her that once when she was a girl and had been afraid to ride a young mare after a fall, "A shaking hand can still hold the reins," Henry Whitaker had said. So Lydia pressed her palms into the dough, folded it over, and breathed until the tremor passed. Elias remained by the kitchen door. He did not step inside. He did not tell her what to do. That alone set him apart from nearly every man who had come through Rose Finch Ranch since Amos Granger took the sign down and painted over her father's name. At last, Lydia covered the dough with a cloth. "You should go with Amos to see the herd. I expect he has Buck for that. Buck will do what he always does. He will look at the cattle, kick at a stone, and agree with the last man who spoke." The corner of Elias's mouth moved, not quite a smile. "And what would you do?" "I would move the herd north of the creek before noon, burn the bitterweed patch before it seeds, and cut clean hay from the upper meadow before frost takes what is left." He nodded, as if each word landed exactly where it belonged. "Then he ought to be listening to you." Lydia looked down at her floury hands. "Ought is a fine word. It does not fix much." "No," Elias said, "but sometimes it points to what needs fixing." Outside, Amos's voice rose near the barn, sharp with irritation. A horse answered with a nervous whinny. Lydia knew that sound. Amos was angry enough to move too quickly around animals. She reached for a towel. Elias noticed. "You are going out there. That horse spooks when men crowd her. Then I will walk with you." Quote. She almost said she did not need him to. The words rose by habit, hard and ready, But he had not offered to protect her, he had only offered to walk. There was a difference. They crossed the yard together. The sun had climbed above the ridge, pale and thin, lighting the frost still clinging to fence rails. Buck and Toby were trying to saddle a nervous sorrel mare near the barn. Amos stood too close to her head, waving one hand as he gave orders no one needed. "Hold her still." Amos snapped. "She will stand if you stop crowding her," Lydia said. Amos turned. "I told you to stay in the kitchen. And I told you that herd needs moving." Buck muttered, "Here we go." The sorrel jerked against the rope. Toby stumbled. Amos cursed and grabbed for the bridle. Lydia moved before thought could catch her. She stepped between Amos and the mare, not fast enough to frighten the animal, but firm enough to claim the space. "Easy, Juniper," she murmured. "Easy, girl. No one is taking anything from you." The mare's eye rolled white. Lydia lifted one flour-dusted hand and laid it against the warm plane of the horse's neck. Her voice dropped lower, soft as a blanket. "That's it. Feel the ground. I know. Too many hands. Too much noise. Just breathe." The sorrel shuddered. Amos said, "Get back before she kicks you." Lydia did not look at him. "Be quiet." The yard went silent. Even Buck stopped breathing for a second. Lydia stroked the mare's neck, slow and steady, feeling the hard beat beneath the skin. Little by little, Juniper lowered her head. Her ears flicked toward Lydia's voice. The rope slackened in Toby's hands. Elias stood near the fence, watching without speaking. That mattered too. He knew enough not to interrupt a thing that was working. When the mare settled, Lydia took the bridle from Amos's hand and passed it to Toby now. Gently, Toby obeyed. Within moments the bridle was set, the saddle cinched, and Juniper stood calm. Amos's face had gone hard, but his eyes were uneasy. "You made your point." "No," Lydia said. The horse made it. Buck looked away, hiding a grin. Amos saw it and grew red. "Move the south herd." "He barked, all of you." Now Lydia stepped back. "Take them north of the creek." Amos mounted stiffly. "I know where to take my own cattle." She met his eyes. "Then prove it." For one breath, no one moved. Then Elias swung into his saddle and turned his bay toward the south pasture. "I will ride along. A buyer has cause to inspect what he might purchase." Amos did not like it, but he could not refuse without making himself look worse. He kicked his horse forward, Buck and Toby following. Lydia watched them ride out, dust rising under the horses' hooves. Her own heart was still beating too hard. She had said more in one morning than she usually allowed herself to say in a month, and every word had cost her. She turned back toward the house. Elias had not gone with them after all. He had stopped near the well, still mounted, looking down at her with that steady face. "You are good with frightened creatures," he said. Lydia wiped flour from her wrist. "I have had practice." His gaze sharpened with understanding, but he did not press the bruise. "Where are the letters?" She looked toward the house. The bedroom at the back, the loose board, the blue cloth, her father's old ledger, the birthday letters, the land map, with Henry Whitaker's own notes in the margins. If Amos found them, they would vanish. If Mr. Bell returned and she could not produce them, she might lose the first real chance she had been given. "My room," she said. Elias dismounted. "May I come as far as the hall?" She studied him. A woman learned caution when every locked door in her life had been opened by men who believed permission was a foolish custom. But Elias asked it plainly, and there was no offense in his face at the possibility of no. "You may come to the hall," she said. Inside, the house felt different. The same polished table. The same curtains her mother had sewn. The same framed hunting print Amos had hung over the mantel after removing her mother's flower painting. But with the men gone, silence settled in the rooms, and Lydia could hear the floorboards answer beneath her feet. She led Elias through the kitchen and into the narrow hallway. "Wait here." He stopped at once. Lydia entered her room and closed the door halfway. It was a small room, once a sewing room, with one iron bed, one washstand, and a narrow chest, where she kept 2 dresses and the few things Amos had not claimed as ranch property. A lantern sat on the floor beside the bed. She lit it, though daylight still edged the window, then knelt and slid her fingers under the 3rd floorboard from the wall. It lifted with a soft groan. Her breath caught. The blue cloth was there. She pulled it free and held it to her chest for a moment before unwrapping it. The letters lay on top, tied with twine. Beneath them sat her father's ledger, the dark cover worn at the corners. Under that was the folded map of Whitaker Ridge, marked with grazing lines, water rights, and notes in her father's careful hand. Then she saw something she had not placed there. A small envelope, yellowed with age, tucked inside the back cover of the ledger. Lydia frowned and opened it. Inside was a single page, folded twice. The ink had faded, but the signature at the bottom was clear. Henry Whitaker. Her father. She sat back on her heels as the room seemed to grow very still around her. Slowly, she unfolded the page. My Lydia, if this letter finds you after I am gone, then I was right to fear that Amos Granger and Thomas Vale have made an arrangement behind my back. I have not signed away Whitaker Ridge. I would never sign away your mother's home or your future. The words blurred, not from tears, but from the force of them. Thomas Vale. Not Caldwell. In this new life of the story, the banker had another name. Thomas Vale, president of the Mercy Crossing Bank, the man who sat in the front pew every Sunday and handed peppermint sticks to children after service. Lydia read on. The deed they may show will be false. Look to the witness names. One of them is a dead man. The other owes Vale more than he can repay. Her hand went cold. A sound came from the hallway. Not Elias. His step was slow and measured. This was lighter, cautious. Lydia folded the letter fast and slipped it into her pocket. She wrapped the rest in the blue cloth and stood. The bedroom door pushed open. Mabel Granger stood there, Amos's widowed sister, with a ring of keys at her waist and a look on her thin face that had never held much warmth for Lydia. Her eyes dropped to the bundle. Well, Mabel said softly, so it is true. Lydia held the cloth tighter. Mabel took one step back toward the hall and lifted her voice. Mr. Wade, you best come here. Elias appeared behind her, his expression calm but alert. Mabel looked from him to Lydia, and for one awful second Lydia thought the woman would call for Amos, would tear the bundle from her hands, would do what everyone in this house had done for 6 years and choose the powerful man. Instead, Mabel's mouth trembled. I know where the second witness is buried, she said. Lydia stared at her. Outside, far off toward the south pasture, a gunshot cracked across the open land. Then another. Elias turned toward the sound. Lydia clutched her father's hidden letter against her heart, and the whole ranch seemed to hold its breath. The gunshots rolled over the pasture and died against the hills. For one sharp second, no one in the little back room moved. Lydia stood with the blue-wrapped bundle in her arms, the hidden letter burning like a live coal inside her pocket. Mabel Granger gripped the doorframe, all the color gone from her face. Elias Wade had already turned toward the hallway, listening. A third sound came, not a shot this time, but a horse screaming. Lydia moved first. She pushed past Mabel and ran. Her boots struck the hall floor hard, then the kitchen boards, then the back steps. Flour rose from her sleeve in little white ghosts as she crossed the yard. Elias was beside her before she reached the barn, not ahead of her, not behind, matching her pace like he had somehow understood she would not be slowed. Where he asked South Creek, Lydia said, "If Amos took the herd there instead of north, the bank drops close to the ravine." Elias caught his horse's reins from the post. "Can you ride?" Lydia was already reaching for Juniper's bridle. I was riding before I could properly spell my name. Quote, that almost smile passed over his mouth again, quick as sunlight on water, but it vanished when another shout rose in the distance. Mabel had followed them to the porch. "Lydia," she called, voice thin with fear. Lydia turned. The older woman stood there with one hand pressed to her chest. For 6 years, Mabel had watched Lydia work herself hollow and had said little. Sometimes, nothing hurt more than the silence of people who knew better. But now Mabel's eyes were wet. The witness, Lydia called. "Who is he?" Mabel swallowed. "The dead one was Peter Vale's brother. But the living one is Jonah Reed. He works at the old freight stable beyond Mercy Crossing." Lydia held those words tight. Jonah Reed. Elias heard them too. She saw it in the way his gaze sharpened. "Do not let Amos in my room," Lydia said. Mabel nodded once. "I won't." There was no time to decide whether she believed her. Lydia swung into the saddle. Juniper shifted under her, still nervous from the morning, but Lydia leaned forward and laid a hand against the mare's neck. "Easy, girl. We are not running from fear today. We are riding through it." Elias mounted his bay, and together they rode out of the yard. The land opened before them in pale winter gold, hard grass bending beneath the wind. The south pasture stretched wide toward the creek, where cottonwoods grew crooked along the bank. Beyond them, the ground dropped into a stony wash deep enough to break a wagon wheel or a horse's leg if a rider came upon it blind. Lydia rode fast, but not wild. Her father had taught her that speed without sense was just another way to lose. She watched the grass, the cattle tracks, the direction of dust in the air. Her eyes caught what others missed because they had been trained by years of being ignored. When nobody asked your mind to speak, it learned to see louder. "There," she said. Elias followed her gaze. A small group of cattle had broken from the herd and crowded near the creek bend. Buck and Toby were waving their hats, trying to turn them back. Amos's horse stood riderless near the cottonwoods, reins dragging. Farther down, something dark moved near the edge of the wash. Lydia's heart struck her ribs. "Amos," she said. They rode harder. When they reached the creek, Buck ran toward them, white-faced. He went down near the ravine, horse spooked at a snake or gun smoke or something. "I fired to turn the herd, but it scattered them worse." Quote, "Where is he?" Elias asked. Buck pointed there. Amos Granger lay half hidden in the dry grass near the drop-off, one leg twisted beneath him, his hat gone. His horse trembled nearby, eyes rolling, a deep scrape along one flank, but no worse injury Lydia could see from a distance. Lydia dismounted before Juniper had fully stopped. "Do not move him," she called when Toby stepped closer. "If his leg is broken and you drag him wrong, you will make it worse," Amos groaned. His face was gray with pain. For 6 years, Lydia had imagined many kinds of justice. Not revenge, never that exactly, but the quiet dream of Amos being made to understand what he had taken. She had imagined his pride stripped away in court, his lies spoken aloud, his name losing weight in the town that had once bowed to it. She had not imagined him lying in the grass, frightened and hurt, and she discovered then that anger and mercy could live in the same heart without canceling each other. She knelt beside him. "Amos, look at me." His eyes opened. Pain made him look older. "My leg," he said, "I see it. Is it bad? It is not good, but you are breathing, and you are going to keep doing that." Elias knelt across from her. "What do you need?" Quote, Lydia looked at Amos's leg, then at the angle of his hip, the torn cloth, the swelling already starting near the boot splints. Straight branches from the creek, 2 belts. "Buck, get the bedroll from Mr. Wade's saddle. Toby, bring my canteen and keep those cattle back from the wash." The men moved, not because Amos had ordered them, because Lydia had. The truth of that struck the air. She felt it, even while her hands were busy. Buck did not argue. Toby did not hesitate. Elias did not repeat her commands in his own voice to make them acceptable. He simply rose and gathered what she had asked for. Amos noticed too. His eyes fixed on her with something like confusion. "You know how to set a leg?" he asked through his teeth. I know how to keep one from getting worse until the doctor comes." "Where did you learn that?" "My father broke his ankle when I was 16. She said, "You were there that winter." "You visited twice." Amos shut his eyes. Maybe he remembered. Maybe he did not. Men like Amos forgot what women survived when the survival did not serve them. Elias returned with the branches. Lydia stripped off her apron and tore it into long bands. "You do not have to use that," Amos muttered. "It is already ruined." Quote, "It was yours." Lydia paused only half a second. "So was this ranch." The words were quiet. Amos opened his eyes. No one spoke. Then Lydia wrapped the splints firmly around his leg. He hissed in pain, and Elias steadied his shoulders. "Hold still." Amos gripped the grass in both fists. "You think this is the Lord punishing me?" Lydia tied the cloth tight. "I think a horse stepped wrong near a ravine because men were shouting at frightened cattle." Buck looked down. Amos breathed hard through his nose. "You always did have an answer." "No," Lydia said. "I always had observations." "You heard them as answers, only when they proved you wrong." A hard wind swept across the pasture. For a moment, Amos looked at her not like a kitchen girl, not like a nuisance, not even like the daughter of the man whose land he had taken. He looked at her like a person standing between him and greater pain. Recognition came to his face unwillingly. It was not enough, but it was something. Elias helped lift Amos onto the bedroll, and together the men fashioned a rough drag from branches and rope. Lydia checked the horse, cleaned the scrape, and spoke softly to the animal until it stopped shaking. "You saved him," Elias said quietly when the others were busy. Lydia kept her hand on the horse's neck. "I kept him alive." "That is not smaller." She looked at him then. His face held no grand wonder, no praise meant to make her blush, only the steady acceptance of what he had seen. It reached a part of her that had been locked so long she almost resented the key. Before she could answer, Toby called from the creek, "Miss Lydia!" "There is something here." She turned. The boy stood near a low patch of yellow bloom at the water's edge. Bitterweed, just where she said it would be. But he was not pointing at the plants. He was pointing at a leather document tube wedged beneath a root, half buried in mud, as if the last storm had washed it free from somewhere upstream. Lydia crossed to him slowly. Her knees felt weak, though she would not let them show it. She knelt and pulled the tube loose. The leather was cracked, the brass cap dark with age. A strip of faded red ribbon clung to one end. Her father had used red ribbon to bind survey copies. She knew that before she opened it. Elias came to stand beside her. Lydia. She removed the cap. Inside was a rolled paper, damp at the edges but still whole. She eased it open with careful hands. The map showed Whitaker Ridge, not Rosefinch Ranch. Her father's markings covered the margins. Boundary lines, water rights, grazing claims. And at the bottom, in Henry Whitaker's unmistakable hand, were 5 words that made her breath leave her. Original deed copy for Lydia. The wind moved through the bitter weed. Behind her, Amos groaned on the makeshift drag. Buck whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Elias did not touch her, but his presence stood firm at her side. Lydia held the muddy deed copy with both hands, and for the first time since she was 20 years old, the land beneath her feet felt like it recognized her back. For a long moment, Lydia could not speak. The paper in her hands was damp, stained with creek mud, and fragile along the edges, but the words at the bottom were steady. Her father's words. Her father's hand. Original deed copy for Lydia. She had spent 6 years carrying memory like evidence no one would accept. Now evidence lay against her palms, cold from the creek and real enough for every person in that pasture to see. Elias stood beside her, so still she could hear his breathing. He did not take the paper from her. He did not ask to inspect it first. That simple restraint settled something deep inside her. Amos groaned from the drag. "What is it?" Lydia turned. His face was pale with pain, but his eyes had gone clear and hard with fear. Not fear of his broken leg, fear of what she held. "It is a deed copy. Lydia said. Buck removed his hat. Toby whispered, "Lord have mercy." Amos swallowed. "Let me see it." No, the word came easier this time. Amos stared at her. Lydia rolled the paper again with careful fingers. "You will see it when Mr. Bell sees it." And when a judge sees it, his mouth tightened, but pain had stolen the strength from his anger. That paper could be ruined. It came out of the creek. "It was protected well enough to survive," Elias said, "and Miss Whitaker is right. It needs to go straight to the county office." Amos's eyes shifted to him. "You think you have a say here?" "No," Elias said. "I think the truth does." The wind moved over the creek, bending the yellow bitterweed as if the whole pasture were bowing under the weight of that sentence. Lydia tucked the rolled deed inside the bodice of her dress, close against the letters already hidden there. It was not proper, perhaps, but neither was stealing a woman's home and asking her to cook supper in it. "First we get Amos to the house," she said. "Then I ride to Mercy Crossing." "You will not ride alone," Elias said. She looked at him. His voice was gentle, but his face had settled into resolve. He seemed to understand before she said it that she would refuse any offer that sounded like command. So he added, "Not because you cannot, because Vale will have men watching the road by now. Thomas Vale." The name turned her stomach. The banker had smiled at her in church for years. He had once handed her a peppermint stick when she was 12 and told her she had her mother's eyes. And all the while, if her father's letter told the truth, Thomas Vale had been waiting to put a false deed beneath a grieving daughter's feet. "I know the old ridge path," Lydia said. "It cuts behind Mercy Crossing and comes in by the freight stable." Then we take that. Amos let out a bitter laugh that became a groan. "You two sound like you have been planning this for months." Lydia looked down at him. "Number. I have been waiting for 6 years. There is a difference." No one answered. They carried Amos slowly back across the pasture. The work was hard and awkward, and every dip in the ground made him curse under his breath. Lydia walked beside the drag, watching his color, checking that the splint held. Elias took most of the pulling without complaint. Buck helped on the other side, sweat shining at his temples despite the cold. Toby drove the cattle away from the creek and kept looking back at Lydia as though she had changed shape before his eyes. Maybe she had. By the time they reached the ranch yard, Mabel was waiting on the porch with her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her face pinched when she saw Amos on the drag. "What happened?" "Broken leg," Lydia said. "Send Toby for Dr. Hensley?" Toby was already running for a fresh horse. Mabel hurried down the steps, then stopped when she saw Lydia's face. "And the papers?" "I have something better than what we had this morning." Mabel pressed one hand to her mouth. Amos snapped, "Don't stand there gawking. Get a bed ready." Mabel flinched by habit, then straightened. It was a small thing, but Lydia saw it. Elias saw it too. "I will," Mabel said. "But you will speak civilly in this house today." Amos looked stunned. Pain and fear had made him slow, and the whole day had filled with women saying no in rooms and pastures where he had once ruled by volume. Lydia almost felt sorry for him. Almost. They got him into the downstairs bedroom, the one used for guests, before guests stopped coming after Amos turned the ranch sour. Mabel boiled water. Lydia checked the splint once more. Amos gripped the quilt and refused to look at her. When Dr. Hensley arrived near late afternoon, he smelled of tobacco and winter air. He examined the leg, praised the splint, and said Amos would not ride for several weeks. "Who set this?" he asked. Lydia wiped her hands on a cloth. "I did." The doctor blinked. "Good work." 2 words. "Good work." They landed in the room like something almost holy. Amos turned his face toward the wall. Mabel looked down at the basin in her hands. Buck, standing by the door, stared at the floor, with a look of shame crawling up his neck. Lydia accepted the words with a nod, because if she let them go deeper, she feared they would break something open. When the doctor finished, Elias met her in the kitchen. Evening had started to lower itself over the ranch. blue shadows filling the corners. The bread she had made that morning had risen too long and collapsed in the pan. For reasons she could not explain, that nearly made her cry. Elias noticed her looking at it. "Bread can be made again," he said. "My father used to say that after every mistake in the kitchen, sounds like he was a wise man. He was Lydia touched the edge of the pan. He taught me numbers, horses, maps, and weather. My mother taught me bread, herbs, and how to keep a house from feeling empty." She looked around the kitchen, at the walls that had heard too much silence. "I have not done well with that last part." "I don't believe that. You have not lived here." "No," Elias said. "But I have seen the way Toby listens when you speak, and the way the horse is quiet under your hand, and the way even Mabel stood straighter today because you did." Lydia turned toward him slowly. There it was again, that terrible, tender danger of being seen. She folded her arms. "You speak as if noticing things is easy." "It is not always easy," he said. "But some things make themselves known," such as his eyes rested on her face. A woman holding a ranch together while everyone else pretends the beams are standing on their own. Quote, Lydia's throat tightened. For 6 years she had learned not to hunger for praise. Hunger made a person foolish. Hunger made a person grateful for crumbs. But this did not feel like a crumb tossed from a man's table. It felt like a door opened and held, with no demand that she walk through before she was ready. Mabel entered then, carrying her shawl and a small tin box. Her face was drawn, but her steps were firm. "We should go before full dark," she said. Lydia looked at her. Mabel set the tin box on the table. "You need Jonah Reed. I know where the old freight stable is, and Jonah will not speak if Elias Wade asks him. He will not speak if you ask him either, but he might speak to me." "Why?" Elias asked. Mabel's fingers rested on the tin lid. "Because I was the one who told him to lie." The kitchen seemed to shrink around them. Lydia stared at her. Mabel closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was a grief in her face, so old it had become part of her skin. "Amos did not know everything at first," she said. "But I knew more than I admitted. Thomas Vale came to this house 3 days after Henry died. He brought papers. He said the ranch was already lost, and that if Amos did not accept the transfer, the bank would take it and throw every soul off the land by winter. He said you would be left with nothing either way." Lydia's hands went cold. Mabel continued, voice shaking. "Jonah Reed was frightened. He owed Vale money. I told him to sign as witness and keep quiet. I told myself I was protecting the house, the workers, Amos, even you. But the truth is, I was afraid of losing the only roof I had." The fire cracked softly in the stove. Lydia could hear Amos coughing in the room beyond the hall. She could hear Buck outside, speaking low to Toby. Life continued with unbearable calm, while the past climbed out of its grave and sat down at the kitchen table. "What is in the box?" Lydia asked. Mabel opened it. Inside lay a folded receipt, 2 old bank notices, and a small silver locket Lydia had not seen since her mother's funeral. Lydia reached for it, then stopped. "Mabel's eyes filled. Vale gave me that after I spoke to Jonah. Said Henry had put it toward debt, and I might as well keep it safe. But I knew your mother wore it every Sunday. Henry would have sold his own boots before he pledged it." Lydia picked up the locket. It was warm from the kitchen air, oval-shaped with tiny flowers engraved across the front. Her mother had kept a small curl of Lydia's baby hair inside. Lydia pressed the locket to her palm and felt 6 years of grief gather in her chest, heavy and bright. Elias looked away, giving her the mercy of not being watched. Mabel whispered, "I am sorry." Lydia closed her fingers around the locket. Part of her wanted to rage. Part of her wanted to ask why apology always arrived years late and empty-handed, except for the damage it could no longer prevent. But another part of her, the part that had knelt in the pasture beside Amos's broken leg, understood that justice did not need to be cruel to be strong. "Then help me now," Lydia said. Mabel nodded. "I will." Elias reached for his hat. "The ridge path will be dark soon." Lydia slipped the locket into her pocket beside her father's letter and the rolled deed copy. Her whole life seemed to rest there now, against her heart. At the door, Buck stood waiting with 3 saddled horses. Lydia stopped. "You saddle Juniper." Buck held out the reins, not meeting her eyes. "Figured you would need her." "Thank you." He shifted his weight, Miss Lydia. "Yes?" Quote. He looked up then, shame and respect fighting across his young face. "That gate this morning. I knew you were right when you said the hinge was bent. I just didn't want the men laughing at me for taking orders from a woman." Lydia studied him for a long moment. Then she said, "Next time, let them laugh." Buck nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She mounted Juniper as the last light faded behind Whitaker Ridge. Elias rode on one side of her, Mabel on the other, and the 3 of them turned toward the old path that led to Mercy Crossing. Behind them, Rosefinch Ranch settled into evening. Ahead, the road darkened between low hills. Lydia touched the pocket where the papers rested and thought of her father's warning, Mabel's confession, Jonah Reed at the freight stable, and Thomas Vale waiting somewhere in town behind polished windows and a banker's smile. For the first time, the truth had names, and before the night was over, Lydia meant to make one of them speak. The ridge path narrowed as darkness settled over the land. Juniper knew the way, though Lydia had not ridden it in years. The mare picked carefully between stones and winter brush, her ears twitching at every sound. To the east, Mercy Crossing glimmered in the distance, a small spill of lamplight against the dark plain. To the west, Whitaker Ridge rose like a black shoulder beneath the stars. Lydia rode between Elias and Mabel without speaking. The old path had once been hers in every season. As a girl, she had taken it to town beside her father, sitting straight in the wagon while Henry Whitaker pointed out tracks in the dirt and clouds over the hills. "Land remembers," he used to say. "Men may draw lines on paper, but the ground knows who cared for it." For 6 years, Lydia had wondered if that was only something kind fathers told daughters to make loss hurt less. Now, with the deed copy pressed close against her heart, she was not so sure. Mabel's horse stumbled once, and Elias reached across smoothly to steady the reins. "Thank you," Mabel said, breathless. He nodded. Lydia glanced at the older woman. Mabel's face looked pale under her bonnet, but she did not ask to turn back. That counted for something. Maybe not enough to erase the past. Maybe nothing could. But the night was cold, the path was rough, and fear was a heavy thing to carry at her age. "You do not have to come all the way," Lydia said. Mabel looked ahead. "Yes, I do." Quote. Lydia did not answer. After another stretch of silence, Mabel spoke again, softer. "Your mother loved this path." Lydia's hands tightened on the reins. She said it was the prettiest road into Mercy Crossing. Mabel continued, said the town looked kinder from a distance. A sad truth if Lydia had ever heard one. "My mother saw kindness where she wanted it to be." Lydia said she saw it in people too. Mabel said even when they did not deserve the favor. Lydia looked at her. "Is that meant to comfort me?" "No." Mabel said it is meant to tell you I remember her. The words struck Lydia in a place she had kept heavily guarded. Her mother had been gone 10 years. Most people in Mercy Crossing had let her memory fade into a few churchyard remarks and an old recipe for peach preserves. To hear Mabel speak of her as a living woman, with thoughts and preferences, unsettled Lydia more than she expected. Elias rode quietly on her other side. He did not push himself into the memory. He let it belong where it belonged. Mercy Crossing grew nearer. They left the ridge path behind an abandoned blacksmith shed and came into town by the old freight road. The main street was still awake. Lanterns burned in the windows of the bank, the hotel, and the Golden Cup Saloon. A piano played somewhere with more effort than skill. Men's voices carried through the cold. Lydia kept her head low, but not from shame. From sense. Thomas Vale would have eyes on the main road, perhaps on the county office too. But the freight stable sat at the back edge of town, where wagons came and went and no one cared much who passed in the dark if they did not block the doors. They tied the horses behind the stable. The building smelled of hay, old leather, damp wood, and tired animals. A single lantern burned near the tack wall. Somewhere inside, a mule stamped and blew through its nose. A thin man with a gray beard came out of the shadows holding a pitchfork. Stables closed, Mabel stepped forward. "Jonah." The man froze. The pitchfork lowered half an inch. Mabel Granger, he said, and the years in his voice were not kind ones. I hope never to see you after dark again. Lydia felt Elias shift beside her. Alert but still, Mabel took off her bonnet with slow, shaking hands. I would not have come if it were not necessary. Jonah's eyes moved to Lydia. He knew her. Everyone in Mercy Crossing knew her, in the way towns knew women they had decided not to help. Poor Lydia Whitaker. Quiet Lydia. Still out at that ranch, is she? Shame what happened, but papers are papers. You look like Henry, Jonah said. Lydia stepped into the lantern light. Then you know why I am here. Jonah closed his eyes briefly. No. The word came out before she had asked the question. Mabel said, Jonah, please, no. His voice sharpened. I did what I did and I have slept badly ever since, but I will not put my neck under Thomas Vale's boot now. I am old. I have no land, no family, and just enough work to keep soup on my stove. You bring trouble to my door and call it truth because you are tired of carrying it. Lydia listened. Then she nodded once. Yes, Jonah blinked. Yes, she repeated. I am tired of carrying it. I am tired of cooking in my mother's kitchen for the man who took her curtains down. I am tired of watching my father's land called by another name. I am tired of men telling me fear is wisdom when it keeps them comfortable and leaves me buried. The stable was silent except for the mule breathing in the dark. Lydia took the folded letter from her pocket and held it out. My father wrote this before he died. He said one witness was dead and the other owed Vale more than he could repay. You were that man. Jonah did not take the letter. His face changed slowly, as if grief had to travel a long road to reach the surface. Henry knew. He whispered. He suspected. Lydia said, he trusted the wrong people, but he was not blind. Mabel covered her mouth with one hand. Jonah turned away. I owed Vale $112. My wife had been sick. I borrowed for the doctor, then for medicine, then for burial. Vale said if I signed as witness, the debt would be cleared. He said the deed was only late paperwork between Henry and Amos. He said no one would be harmed. No one except Lydia, Mabel said. Jonah looked back at her sharply. And you told me to believe him. Mabel bowed her head. I know. The old man's anger did not soften, but it seemed to lose direction. He leaned the pitchfork against the wall and rubbed both hands over his face. Elias spoke at last. Mr. Reed, the county officer is coming to the ranch tomorrow. A lawyer can use your statement. Without it, Vale may still twist the matter. Jonah gave a dry laugh. And with it, Vale ruins me. Quote, he already has, Lydia said. The words were not cruel, they were plain. Jonah looked at her as if she had placed a mirror in front of him. You are living in a stable, Lydia said. You are afraid of a banker after 6 years of silence. Whatever peace he promised you, it was a poor bargain. Jonah sank onto a wooden stool. For a while, no one spoke. Then he said, I saw the false deed Lydia's breath caught. Jonah stared at the dirt floor. I saw Vale put it in Amos Granger's hands. I saw the signature. I knew it was wrong. Mabel began to cry silently. Lydia did not. Her whole body had gone very still. Why, she asked. The question was small, but it carried 6 years. Jonah looked at her. Because your father signed my wife's burial paper as witness the spring before he died. I had seen his name clear as day. The deed did not look the same. But Vale was standing there with my debt note in his pocket, and Amos was talking about saving the ranch from bank seizure, and Mabel was telling me this was best for everyone, and I was a coward. The word hung in the hay-scented air. Lydia wanted to hate him. For a moment she tried, but all she saw was an old man, bent beneath a choice he could not undo. Hate would have been simple, truth was not. Will you tell Mr. Bell? She asked. Jonah looked at Mabel, then at Elias, then finally at Lydia. If I tell it, he said, I tell it once proper, with a sworn paper and a witness. "I have paper in my saddlebag," Elias said. "And there is a notary at the hotel." Jonah shook his head. "Not the hotel. Vale owns half the ears in that place." Mabel wiped her face, Reverend Pike. "He keeps the church office open late on Thursdays for accounts." "He is a notary." Lydia had not stepped inside that church for anything but funerals in 6 years. Thomas Vale sat in the front pew there every Sunday with his polished shoes and folded hands. "Then we go now," she said. Jonah rose slowly, as if his bones had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. He took his coat from a nail and reached for the lantern. Before they left, he stopped in front of Lydia. "I am sorry," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I believe you," she said. "That is not the same as forgiveness." His eyes filled number. "I reckon it is not." They slipped out the back of the stable and moved along the alley behind the shops. Mercy Crossing looked different from the shadows. The town that had once seemed so sure of who mattered and who did not now appeared stitched together by secrets. Every warm window hiding some bargain, some silence, some small surrender made in the name of survival. At the corner near the churchyard, Elias touched Lydia's elbow lightly. She stopped. 2 men stood across the street beneath the bank awning. One held a cigar. The other wore the brown coat of Vale's clerk. They were watching the church steps. Mabel drew in a frightened breath. Jonah whispered. He knew Lydia looked at the church, then the alley, then the line of back fences leading toward the side door of the building. Her mind moved quickly, clearer under pressure than it ever was in peace. "We do not use the front," she said. Elias looked at her with that steady trust that made her feel braver and more known at once. "What do you see?" he asked. She pointed toward the dark behind the church, a cellar door beneath the east window. Reverend Pike stores preserves there for the winter charity baskets. It opens under the vestry. Mabel stared at her. "How do you know that?" "My mother ran those baskets for years," Lydia said. For the first time that night, Elias smiled fully. Not bright, not careless, proud. The sight of it warmed her despite the cold. If quiet strength has ever kept a home, a ranch, or a heart alive, stay with Lydia now, she whispered, as if speaking not only to Elias and Mabel and Jonah, but to every unseen soul who might one day hear her story. Some truths take a long road before they reach the light. They moved through the narrow gap between the mercantile and the undertaker's shed, then crossed the churchyard low and fast. Frost silvered the grass around the headstones. Lydia did not look toward her parents' graves. Not yet. She could not afford that tenderness until the work was done. The cellar door was stiff with cold. Elias pulled once. It did not move. Lydia knelt, felt beneath the latch, and found the little rusted catch her mother used to complain about lift. Then pull. Elias obeyed. The door opened with a soft groan. They descended into darkness one by one. Inside, the cellar smelled of apples, wax, and earth. Jonah held the lantern low. Mabel followed close behind him. Elias waited until Lydia stepped down, then eased the door shut above them. For one breath, they were hidden. Then footsteps crossed overhead. Slow, heavy, stopping directly above the cellar door. No one breathed. A man's voice came from outside, muffled but clear enough. "Check the back." Vale said the woman from the ranch might try something tonight. Lydia's hand tightened around her father's letter. Elias leaned close enough for her to hear his whisper, "Stay behind me." She turned her head, her face inches from his in the lantern gloom. "No," she whispered back, "stay beside me." For a heartbeat. Danger waited above them, and something warmer than fear moved quietly between them below. Then the cellar latch began to lift. The cellar latch rose with a slow scrape. Lydia stood in the dark beneath the church with her father's letter pressed to her heart, and Elias Wade beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the cold air. Above them, one of Vale's men muttered, "Door's stuck," another voice answered from farther off. "Then pull harder." Mabel made the smallest sound, half breath and half prayer. Jonah Reed's lantern shook in his hand, throwing weak gold light across shelves of apple jars and folded flour sacks. In that trembling light, Lydia saw his face sink toward old fear. He was already slipping backward into the man who had signed a lie because Thomas Vale stood too close to his life. Lydia reached out and put her hand over his on the lantern. He looked at her. "No more running," she whispered. The latch lifted higher. Elias moved one step toward the stairs. Lydia moved with him. He glanced at her, and even in the gloom, she saw the question in his eyes. Not fear for himself, fear for her. She shook her head once. "Beside me." His jaw tightened, but he gave the smallest nod. The cellar door opened 2 inches. Cold moonlight cut across the top step. Lydia's mind moved faster than her heartbeat. If Vale's men saw Jonah, the sworn statement would die before it was born. If they saw Elias, the matter would turn into a fight, and a fight would bring the town running before Reverend Pike could hear a word. If they saw Mabel, Vale would know exactly which old secret had cracked open. But if they saw only Lydia, perhaps they would do what men had done for 6 years. They would underestimate her. She stepped up the stairs. Elias caught her wrist, not hard, just enough to ask her to think. She leaned close and whispered, "Trust me." His hand released at once. That was when Lydia knew something had changed between them. Not because he wanted to protect her. Men had wanted to protect women for as long as they wanted to command them. It changed because Elias listened when she named what she needed. Lydia climbed the last 3 steps and pushed the cellar door open with her shoulder. The man above stumbled back in surprise. He was young, with a brown coat too fine for stable work, and a pistol at his hip he had likely never drawn except before a mirror. Lydia knew him. Samuel Price, one of Vale's clerks. He had once refused to cash her supply note until Amos came to town and nodded permission. His eyes widened, "Miss Whitaker." She lifted her chin. "Mr. Price, what are you doing down there?" "Checking the preserve stores for Reverend Pike." She stepped fully into the cold, blocking his view of the stairs behind her. "My mother used to oversee winter charity baskets. The Reverend asked me to see what was left." Samuel looked uncertain. That was useful. Uncertain men liked easy answers. They reached for them like coats in bad weather. "At this hour," he asked. "I came from the ranch late. Is there a county rule against charity after sundown?" His mouth opened, then closed. The second man came around the corner of the church. Older, he had a thick neck, a miner's shoulders, and a narrow gaze that did not soften when it landed on Lydia. Walt Breen, Vale's collector, a man who smiled when farmers signed extensions they did not understand. "What's this?" Walt asked Miss Whitaker. Samuel said, "She says Reverend Pike sent her." Walt came closer. "Did he?" Lydia could feel Elias below her, silent in the darkness. She could feel Mabel and Jonah waiting, all their hope balanced on her voice. "You can ask him," Lydia said. "I will, then, do it at the front door like a decent man." She took one step down from the cellar entrance and pulled the door until it rested against her skirt, hiding the gap. "Unless Mr. Vale now sends bankmen to search church cellars without permission," Walt's eyes narrowed. There it was, the line. Men like Walt could frighten borrowers, widows, workers, and girls in worn dresses. But even he understood that being caught prying open a church cellar on a banker's orders might sour the town's stomach. "You got a sharp tongue tonight," he said. "No," Lydia answered. "Only a clear one." Samuel looked at Walt, then away. From the street came the sound of wagon wheels and men laughing outside the saloon. The town was not far. Witnesses were not far. Lydia rested one hand on the cellar door and hoped Walt could count the risk. "He could. Vale wants a word with you," he said. "I am not hard to find." "That's so. I have been at the same ranch for 6 years while everyone in this town watched and called it settled." Walt stared at her. Something ugly passed through his face, but he swallowed it because the church windows were lit and Reverend Pike might open the door at any moment. At last he spat into the grass. "This ain't over." "No," Lydia said. "It is not." Walt turned and walked toward the front of the church. Samuel hesitated. He looked at Lydia differently now. Not kindly, not respectfully, but with a new confusion, as if the woman he had dismissed at the bank counter had stepped out of the place assigned to her and left him staring at an empty chair. "Miss Whitaker," he said. "You ought to be careful." Lydia looked at him. "I have been careful. That is why I am still here." He flushed, then followed Walt. Lydia waited until their footsteps faded before she opened the cellar door. Elias came up first. His face was calm, but his eyes held a storm he had kept leashed for her sake. "That was a dangerous thing," he said quietly. "Yes." Quote, "You did it well." The words were simple, but they reached her anyway. Mabel came out next, then Jonah, who looked as if he had aged and awakened at the same time. He stared after Vale's men with a strange look on his face. "He sends boys now," Jonah murmured. "Boys with clean coats to do dirty work. Then let us give them cleaner work to fear," Mabel said. Lydia looked at her. The older woman seemed surprised by her own words, but she did not take them back. They moved around the side of the church and climbed the narrow steps to the vestry door. Elias knocked softly. Inside, a chair scraped. Reverend Pike opened the door with a ledger in one hand and spectacles halfway down his nose. He was a tall, stooped man with silver hair and kind eyes that had sometimes been too gentle when courage was needed. Lydia had spent years resenting that softness. Now he looked at the four people on his step and went very still. "Miss Whitaker." "He," said Mrs. Granger. "Mr. Reed." Then his gaze moved to Elias. "Sir." "We need a statement notarized," Lydia said. Tonight, Reverend Pike looked past them toward the street. "Does this concern?" Thomas Vale. "Yes." The Reverend removed his spectacles slowly. For a moment, Lydia thought he might refuse. Mercy Crossing had long bent around Thomas Vale like grass around a stone. The church needed bank drafts. Families needed loans. Men who owed money were careful with their prayers. But Reverend Pike stepped back. "Come in," he said. The vestry was small and warm, with a potbelly stove glowing in the corner and account book stacked on a side table. A framed verse hung crooked near the door. Lydia noticed dust on the sill, ink on the Reverend's thumb, and a plate of untouched biscuits beside his ledger. Little human things. Signs that even men in collars carried burdens less neatly than they appeared. Jonah sat at the desk. His hands trembled when Elias placed paper before him. Reverend Pike dipped the pen in ink. "I will write what you state, Mr. Reed. You will read it back, and then sign if it is true." Jonah looked at Lydia. She stood across from him, not softening her face, not hardening it either. "Tell it all," she said. He did. The words came slowly at first, then faster. He told of his debt to Thomas Vale after his wife's death. He told of being called to the bank after hours. He told of Amos standing there, troubled but willing. He told of Mabel urging him to sign. He told of the deed already prepared, Henry Whitaker's name written in a hand that was close but wrong, the first witness listed as Peter Vale, who had been dead nearly a year at the time. "Reverend Pike stopped writing dead?" he asked. Jonah swallowed, buried behind the old Methodist chapel. "I helped dig the grave." Mabel gripped the back of a chair. Lydia took out her father's hidden letter and placed it on the desk. "My father knew one witness was dead. He wrote it before he passed." The Reverend read the lines, and shame settled over his face like ash. "He came to me once." Reverend Pike said softly, "Henry." A few months before the fever took him, he said he was worried about Vale. I told him to seek counsel and pray for wisdom. His voice broke a little. "I should have done more." Lydia looked at him. "Yes." The word was not cruel. It did not need to be. Truth had weight enough. Reverend Pike bowed his head. "Then tonight, I will—" He finished the statement. Jonah read it, lips moving over every line. When he reached the end, he sat for a long time with the pen in his hand. "I sign this," he said, and Vale will know Elias stood near the door, listening for movement outside. He already knows enough to be afraid. Jonah gave a thin smile, afraid of Lydia Whitaker. "Never thought I would see the day Lydia held his gaze." Neither did he, Jonah signed. Reverend Pike notarized the paper with steady hands. The stamp came down with a firm sound that seemed too small for what it meant. One mark of ink against 6 years of silence. Mabel sat down suddenly and covered her face. Lydia placed one hand on the desk to steady herself. The room had grown too warm. Or perhaps the cold inside her had begun to thaw. And the feeling was painful because numbness had been easier. Elias came to her side. "Breathe," he said quietly. "I am. Not like someone filling a bucket before the rope breaks." She almost laughed, but it came out uneven. The Reverend folded the signed statement and handed it to Lydia. "Take it to Mr. Bell at first light." "No," Lydia said tonight. Elias nodded. "Where does the county officer lodge?" "Back room of the newspaper office when he is in town," Reverend Pike said. "His sister owns the press." Lydia tucked the statement inside her coat with the deed copy and letters. "Then we go there." Mabel rose, wiping her eyes. "I am coming." Jonah reached for his hat. "So am I." Quote. The Reverend looked toward the dark window. "Vale's men are watching the front." "Then we leave through the choir door," Lydia said. All eyes turned to her. She shrugged lightly. "My mother sang alto. I know every door in this church." Elias looked at her in that way again, as if each hidden piece of her mattered. As if no knowledge was small simply because no man had praised it. They slipped through the choir room and out into the churchyard. Frost crunched beneath their boots. Lydia kept close to the shadows, leading them between headstones and winter shrubs. This time, she looked toward her parents' graves. 2 stones beneath the cottonwood. Henry Whitaker. Anna Whitaker. Beloved. Just that. One word for lives too large to fit in stone. Lydia paused only a moment. Elias stopped beside her. "My mother is there," she whispered. "My father beside her." Elias removed his hat. No speech. No easy comfort. Just respect. The gesture broke something gentle inside her. She turned away before tears could rise. "We have to move." They crossed behind the mercantile and reached the narrow alley beside the newspaper office. A lamp still burned in the back window. Lydia climbed the steps and knocked twice. A woman opened the door holding a printer's rag in one hand. She had ink on her cheek and sharp gray eyes. "Yes, I need Mr. Bell," Lydia said. The woman looked at the group behind her, then at Lydia's face. "You must be Henry Whitaker's girl." "I am about time," the woman said, and opened the door wider. Mr. Bell stood inside, near a cluttered desk, coat off, sleeves rolled, reading by lamplight. When Lydia entered, he looked first at her face, then at the papers in her hand. "What do you have?" Lydia laid them before him one by one. Her father's letter. The muddy deed copy. Jonah Reed's sworn statement. The receipt and bank notices from Mabel's tin box. Mr. Bell read in silence. The newspaper woman stood behind him, eyes bright with growing understanding. Elias remained near the door, watching the alley. Jonah sank into a chair. Mabel clasped both hands together so tightly her knuckles whitened. When Mr. Bell finished, he looked up. "This changes everything," he said. Lydia closed her eyes for one breath. Only one. Then she opened them. "What happens now?" "Now," Mr. Bell said, "I wake Judge Hollis." The newspaper woman gave a low whistle. Mr. Bell gathered the papers. "And Miss Whitaker, by morning this town will know there is formal cause to challenge the Granger deed." From outside came the sudden sound of hoofbeats, stopping hard in the street. Elias turned sharply. A voice rang out beyond the newspaper office, smooth and cold enough to make every person in the room still Lydia Whitaker. I know you are inside Thomas Vale." Mabel went pale. Jonah whispered, "God help us." Lydia stood in the lamplight, with ink, paper, proof, and 6 years of buried truth between her and the door. Elias stepped beside her, not in front. Mr. Bell reached for his coat, and Lydia, who had once been told she had no place in matters of land or law, lifted her chin as Thomas Vale waited outside and said, "Then let him hear the truth from me." The name Thomas Vale passed through the newspaper office like a cold wind under a locked door. For 6 years, Lydia had seen that name printed on bank drafts, church donation notices, and the polished brass plate outside the Mercy Crossing Bank. She had watched men remove their hats when Vale stepped onto the boardwalk. She had watched women lower their voices when he passed, not from affection but from the old habit of debt. Now he stood outside in the street asking for her. Not Amos Granger, not Elias Wade, not Mr. Bell, her. Lydia felt the truth of it settle over her shoulders. Thomas Vale finally understood that the quiet woman at the ranch was not a loose thread. She was the seam holding the whole lie together, and if she pulled hard enough, the cloth would tear. Elias stood beside her, close but not crowding. His hand rested near his belt, but his eyes were on Lydia. "What do you want to do?" he asked. The question mattered. Not, "Stay back," not, "Let me handle him," not even, "Are you afraid? What do you want to do?" Lydia looked at the papers on the desk. Her father's letter. Jonah's sworn statement. The old deed copy. Mabel's evidence from the tin box. For years, the truth had lived in separate shadows. Now it lay together in lamplight. "I want him to know I am not hiding," she said. Mr. Bell put on his coat. "Then we do this properly. Mrs. Landry, open the front shutters." The newspaper woman smiled without warmth with pleasure. She crossed the room and threw open the shutters facing Main Street. Light spilled out. Thomas Vale stood below in a dark wool coat, gloved hands folded over the head of a cane he did not need. Behind him stood Walt Breen and Samuel Price, and beyond them several townspeople had begun to gather near the saloon and mercantile. Mercy Crossing loved a disturbance as long as it happened to someone else. Vale looked up toward the window. He was handsome in the polished way of expensive furniture, all smooth lines and careful finish. His silver hair was combed back. His collar was clean. His face held the calm of a man who had spent years arranging other people's fear into his own comfort. "Miss Whitaker," he called, "you are keeping poor company tonight." Lydia stepped to the open doorway before Elias could move. She felt him follow her, stopping at her side, not ahead. The air outside bit her cheeks. The street was mud and frost under lantern light. She descended the steps slowly, each board creaking beneath her boots. Every eye turned toward her, some curious, some ashamed, some hungry for trouble. Vale smiled. "There you are," he said gently, as if speaking to a lost child. "This has gone far enough." Lydia stopped at the bottom step. "It has not gone nearly far enough." A murmur moved through the crowd. Vale's smile thinned. "You are tired. You have been misled by men who see advantage in stirring old grief." Quote, Elias's jaw tightened, but Lydia spoke before he could. "My grief was never old to me." Vale inclined his head, of course. "But grief makes poor judgment. Your father's affairs were complicated. Mr. Granger assumed burdens you could not have managed alone." "I managed his ranch for 6 years." The murmur grew. Vale's eyes flickered. "Only once I am sure you helped in your way," he said. "There it was, the soft little knife, in your way. A woman's work made small by a man who had profited from it." Lydia reached into her coat and took out the muddy deed copy. Gasps rose as she unrolled it under the lamplight. "This is my father's deed copy," she said, marked in his hand. Hidden where the creek washed it loose, Vale did not look at the paper for long. Sentimental items often appear convincing to those who need them to be. Mrs. Landry leaned from the doorway. "Careful, Mr. Vale. That sounds like a quote worth printing." The crowd stirred again. Mr. Bell came down behind Lydia, Jonah and Mabel following. The county man held Jonah's sworn statement in one hand. "We also have testimony," Mr. Bell said. Vale's gaze moved to Jonah. For the first time, real anger touched his face. "Jonah Reed," he said softly. "I had heard you were unwell." Jonah gripped the railing beside him. "I was." For 6 years, Vale's eyes hardened. Old men sometimes remember things incorrectly. "Not this," Jonah said. His voice shook, but it held. "I signed a false witness mark because I owed you money." Peter Vale was listed as witness too, and Peter had been dead near a year. The crowd broke into louder whispers. Someone said, "Dead." Someone else said, Lord above Vale lifted one hand. "These are serious accusations from desperate people." Mabel stepped forward then. Her face was pale, but she stood straight. "I was there." Vale looked at her, and his expression turned warning. "Mrs. Granger, you should consider your brother's condition before you speak recklessly." Mabel swallowed. Lydia saw fear pass through her. Then the older woman looked at Lydia, and something like apology crossed her face again, but stronger now because it had taken shape as courage. "My brother's condition," Mabel said, "is that he has a broken leg because he would not listen to a woman who knew the land better than he did. My condition is worse. I have carried a lie long enough." Vale's mouth tightened. Mabel held out the bank notices. "You came to our house after Henry Whitaker died. You told us the land was lost either way. You told me Lydia would have no home if Amos did not accept the transfer. You gave me Anna Whitaker's locket and said it had been pledged against debt. That was a lie, too." The name of Lydia's mother moved through the crowd. Lydia felt it like a hand pressed between her shoulder blades. Thomas Vale looked around then and realized the town was listening not as spectators now, but as witnesses. His voice lowered. "Miss Whitaker, you are making enemies you cannot afford." Elias took one step, but Lydia lifted her hand slightly. He stopped. She looked at Vale. "I could never afford them. They came anyway." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Samuel Price, the young clerk, stepped back from Walt Breen. Vale noticed Samuel. The young man's face was white. "Mr. Vale, is it true about Peter Vale?" "Be quiet." "But I copied old burial records last spring for the church repairs." Samuel's voice trembled. "Peter Vale died in 1877. The crowd erupted. Vale turned on him. "You foolish boy." Samuel flinched. Lydia saw herself in that flinch. 6 years of people bending under a voice because the voice controlled wages, credit, shelter, reputation. She stepped towards Samuel. "Do you have access to those records?" He looked at her, frightened. "Yes," he whispered. "Then bring them to Mr. Bell by morning." Vale snapped. "You will do no such thing." Samuel looked from Vale to Lydia, then to the crowd. Something changed in his young face. Not bravery yet, but the first thin root of it. Yes. He said, "I will." Walt Breen grabbed Samuel's arm. Elias moved fast. He did not draw a weapon. He simply crossed the space, took Walt's wrist, and held it with quiet strength until the collector's fingers opened. "Let the boy choose," Elias said. Walt glared, but stepped back. Vale's calm was gone now. Only the polished shell remained, cracking at the edges. "This is not a courtroom," he said. "No," Mr. Bell answered. "But it is enough to wake one." He turned to Mrs. Landry. "Send for Judge Hollis." Mrs. Landry was already tying her shawl. "I thought you would never ask." She pushed through the crowd and hurried toward the judge's house. Vale looked at Lydia, and for the first time he did not hide his hatred. "You should have stayed quiet," he said. Lydia thought of the kitchen table, the loose floorboard, the broken gate, the bitter weed, Amos lying in the grass, Mabel crying over an old locket, Jonah signing his name with shaking hands, Elias standing beside her in every danger but never taking her place. "No," she said, "I stayed quiet too long." The crowd parted as Judge Hollis came down the street in a heavy coat, Mrs. Landry at his side and 2 town deputies behind him. He was a stern man with white brows and a limp from an old riding injury. "What is this disturbance?" he demanded. Mr. Bell stepped forward. "Your Honor, we have material evidence regarding the Whitaker Ridge transfer." Judge Hollis looked from Mr. Bell to Vale, then to Lydia. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "is this your claim?" The town went silent. 6 years ago, no judge had asked her that. Men had spoken around her, over her, through her. They had decided the shape of her life while she stood in the room like a shadow. Now every face waited. Lydia felt Elias beside her. She did not look at him, but his nearness steadied her like a hand at her back. She lifted her chin. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, "it is my claim. My father did not sign away Whitaker Ridge. The deed was false, the witnesses were false, and the land was mine by right." Judge Hollis held out his hand. "Then let me see what proof you carry." Lydia placed the papers in his palm. As he began to read, Thomas Vale turned and walked swiftly toward the bank. Elias saw it. "So did Lydia, Judge," she said sharply. "He is going for the bank records." Vale broke into a run. For one stunned second, the town froze. Then Lydia gathered her skirt and ran after him. Lydia ran into the street with her skirt gathered in one hand and 6 years of silence breaking behind her like a storm. Thomas Vale was already halfway to the bank. His polished coat flew open as he ran, and his cane lay forgotten in the mud behind him. All the dignity he had worn like armor had fallen away. He no longer looked like the calm banker of Mercy Crossing. He looked like a man racing his own past to a locked drawer. "Stop him!" Mr. Bell shouted, but the town did not move fast enough. People stared, stunned by the sight of Thomas Vale running from a woman he had once barely nodded to in church. "Maugay Sarch." Walt Breen shoved through the crowd after him, and Samuel Price stood frozen near the newspaper steps, his face pale with the shock of choosing a side and not yet knowing what that choice would cost. Lydia did not wait for anyone. She knew the bank. She knew the front door, the side alley, the back entrance where deliveries came in, the high window that never latched properly in summer because Mrs. Tilden from the bakery had once complained that bank dust blew into her flour sacks. She also knew Thomas Vale would not go through the front if he meant to destroy records. He would go through the side. "Lydia!" Elias called. His boots struck the boards behind her. He was coming, fast and steady, but she did not slow. She could hear him gaining, not to overtake her, but to stay with her. "Beside me." The words seemed to live between them now. Vale reached the bank alley and vanished into the dark gap between buildings. Lydia cut left before she reached it. Elias followed without asking why. She crossed behind the apothecary, pushed through a narrow gate, and came out near the rear wall of the bank. There, just as she expected, Thomas Vale was fumbling with keys at the back door. He looked up as she appeared. For 1 second, surprise made him foolish. Lydia seized a broken broom handle from beside a rain barrel and jammed it through the iron door ring just as he shoved the key into the lock from the outside. The handle caught between the ring and a side hook used for milk deliveries. The door would open half an inch, no more. Vale yanked once. The broom handle held. His eyes rose slowly to hers. "You little fool," he said. Lydia stood on the other side of the narrow yard, breathing hard. "You taught this town to lock doors against fear." I paid attention. Vale pulled again, harder. Wood cracked, but did not give. Elias stepped into the yard behind Lydia. Walt Breen came skidding into the alley a moment later, broad chest heaving. He reached for Lydia, but Elias caught his arm and turned him hard against the bank wall. The move was quick, clean, and without cruelty. Walt grunted as his shoulder struck brick. "Enough," Elias said. Walt's eyes darted to Vale. "Do something." Vale snapped. Before Walt could try, 2 deputies rounded the corner with Mr. Bell behind them. Judge Hollis followed more slowly, leaning on his cane but walking with iron purpose. "What is the meaning of this?" the judge demanded. Vale released the door ring and smoothed his coat as if dignity could be put back on by hand. "I came to secure bank property from a mob." Lydia almost laughed. She did not, because the moment was too sharp for laughter. You ran, she said. And you ran here before any mob existed. Judge Hollis looked at the jammed door, then at Vale opened the bank. Vale's expression became still. Your Honor, bank records are private, not when they are material to a claim of land fraud. I object to this theater. This is not a courtroom yet, Judge Hollis said, but I am still a judge, and you are standing in an alley trying to enter a bank after being accused of forging land documents. Open the door, Mr. Vale. For the first time that night, Thomas Vale looked trapped, not frightened in the simple way. Calculating. Measuring how much of the town had seen him run. Measuring which lies still had room to breathe. He lifted his chin. I will open it only under formal order. Judge Hollis turned to Mr. Bell. Right one. Mr. Bell pulled paper from his coat, placed it against the brick wall, and began writing by lantern light. Mrs. Landry had followed with half the town behind her. She stood near the alley mouth, eyes bright as burning coals. This will make a fine morning edition, she said. Vale turned a cold look on her. Print one word of slander, and I will own your press by Christmas. Mrs. Landry smiled. You should have thought of that before giving me witnesses. Samuel Price pushed through the crowd then, carrying a ledger against his chest. Vale saw him and went white with rage. What have you done? He said. Samuel held the ledger. Tighter burial records. From the church repair copies. I brought them from my room. I kept the duplicate set when Reverend Pike asked me to help sort them. Judge Hollis held out his hand. Samuel gave him the book. The judge opened it beneath Mr. Bell's lantern. Lydia stood very still as his finger moved down the page. Peter Vale, deceased October 3, 1877. Judge Hollis looked up, and the Whitaker transfer deed was dated. Mr. Bell answered March 18, 1878. The alley fell silent. A dead man had witnessed a deed 5 months after being buried. No clever banker's speech could soften that. Vale's face looked carved from stone clerical error. Jonah Reed stepped from the crowd, shaking but upright. No, it was no error. You told me Peter's name gave the paper family weight. Those were your words. Vale's nostrils flared. You drunk old liar. Mabel came forward too, and you told me Lydia would be homeless if we did not cooperate. Walt Breen lowered his gaze. Buck and Toby had arrived at the edge of the crowd, likely sent from the ranch after word spread. Buck looked at Lydia, then at Vale, and something hardened in his young face. Judge Hollis took the paper from Mr. Bell, read it, and signed deputies. This order authorizes the immediate securing of bank records related to Henry Whitaker, Amos Granger, Whitaker Ridge, Rose Finch Ranch, and any loan or deed transaction connected to those names. Vale's mouth twisted. You have no right. I have the law, the judge said, which you may have mistaken for a tool that belonged only to you. The deputies removed the broken broom handle and opened the bank. The smell inside was ink, dust, polish, and iron. Lydia had stepped into that building dozens of times with supply notes, always made to wait. Always made to feel that the floor beneath her boots was too fine for her. Now she crossed the threshold with Judge Hollis, Mr. Bell, Elias, and the deputies. Vale followed because he could not bear to be absent from his own undoing. The lamps were lit. Shadows jumped across rows of desks, ledgers, file drawers, and the heavy iron safe at the back. Samuel pointed to a cabinet behind Vale's private desk. Older property files are there, he said softly. But Mr. Vale keeps special debt papers in the safe. Judge Hollis looked at Vale. Open it. Vale stared at Samuel as if he could kill courage by hating it. Then he opened the safe. Inside were stacked papers, leather folders, cash boxes, and bundles tied with string. Mr. Bell began removing documents carefully, naming each item aloud as Mrs. Landry wrote it down in a reporter's notebook. Henry Whitaker, loan note, 1873. Lydia's breath stopped. Amos Granger, restructuring agreement, 1879. Elias moved closer. His hand did not touch her, but his sleeve brushed hers. A small steadiness, Whitaker Ridge draft transfer, Mr. Bell paused. Judge Hollis leaned over. Draft Mr. Bell opened the folder. Inside were 3 versions of the same deed. The signatures grew closer with each copy. One page held nothing but Henry Whitaker's name, practiced over and over in dark ink. Lydia heard Mabel whisper behind her, "Oh, Henry," quote. For a moment, the room blurred, not because Lydia doubted what she saw, because certainty, when proven after years of being dismissed, did not arrive gently. It came like thunder over dry ground. She put one hand on the edge of the desk. Elias spoke quietly. "Steady. I am steady. I know." And strangely she was. Vale's face had gone empty. Judge Hollis lifted the practice page. "Mr. Vale." The banker said nothing. "Do you care to explain why Henry Whitaker's signature appears here in repeated drafts?" Vale's eyes moved around the room. The deputies. Samuel, Jonah, Mabel, Mrs. Landry, Elias, Lydia. The town had finally entered the room where the lie had lived. At last, Vale said, "Henry owed me more than he could repay." Lydia's voice came before anyone else's. "So you stole what debt could not buy." His eyes snapped to her. "Your father was sentimental. Weak with land. Weak with you. He would have lost it all in time." "No," Lydia said. "He nearly lost it because he trusted you." Vale laughed once, bitter and sharp. "Trust is what foolish people call poor accounting." Lydia stepped closer. She could feel everyone watching, but for once their eyes did not make her smaller. "My father built that ranch with honest hands," she said. "My mother kept it warm. I kept it alive after you buried it under lies. You may understand numbers, Mr. Vale, but you never understood worth." The words settled deep in the room. Elias looked at her then, and the pride in his face almost undid her. Judge Hollis turned to the deputies. "Secure every file in this safe. Thomas Vale, you will remain available to the court pending formal charges." Vale stiffened. "You cannot hold me. I can make sure you do not leave town tonight." The deputies moved to either side of him. Outside, the crowd had grown. Word was spreading fast. Mercy Crossing was waking from the long dream Vale had sold it. Mrs. Landry hurried to the front door, already calling for her press boy, Wake the type. "We print tonight." Lydia turned away from the safe and stepped outside into the cold air. The street had changed. People who had looked through her for years now looked directly at her, some with shame, some with wonder, some with questions they had no right to ask. Buck stood near the boardwalk, hat in his hands. "Miss Lydia," he said, voice rough. "I'm sorry." Toby stood beside him, nodding hard. More apologies would come, she knew. Mercy Crossing would offer them like late rain after the crop had already struggled through drought. Some would be sincere. Some would be a way for people to feel better about having watched her disappear. She was not ready to sort them. Elias came out behind her. For a moment they stood apart from the noise near the newspaper steps where the lamplight fell soft and gold. "You did it." He said. "No," Lydia said, watching Mr. Bell carry the bank records to a waiting wagon. "Not yet." His gaze stayed on her. "Then, what did you do?" She thought of the loose floorboard, the broken gate, the bitter weed, the cellar door, Jonah's shaking signature, Samuel's ledger, and Thomas Vale's face when the safe opened. "I made them look," she said. Elias nodded. "That can be the hardest part." The town bell rang once, then again, calling people toward the judge's chambers. The night had not ended. The court would open before dawn, if Judge Hollis meant to preserve the evidence properly. Amos was still at the ranch with a broken leg and a claim that might fall apart by sunrise. Vale still had money, influence, and a cornered man's danger. But Lydia stood beneath the cold Mercy Crossing stars, with her mother's locket in her pocket, and her father's proof in lawful hands. If this moment touched your heart, remember Lydia's quiet strength, because some women do not need a rescue to rise. They need one person to believe what they have been proving all along. A wagon lantern swung near the bank. Then Samuel Price came running from the safe room, face white again. Judge Hollis. He shouted, "There's another file." Everyone turned. Samuel held up a narrow black folder tied with red string. His voice shook as he read the name written across it, Lydia Mae Whitaker. The street went utterly still. Thomas Vale smiled for the first time since the safe opened, and Lydia felt Elias step beside her as the last hidden secret of the bank came into the light. The black folder looked too small to carry another wound. Samuel Price held it with both hands, as if the red string around it might burn his fingers. The name written across the front was plain, careful, and unmistakable. Lydia Mae Whitaker. For one strange moment, Lydia felt no fear, only a tired wonder. Of course there was more. Men like Thomas Vale did not steal one thing when they could steal three. They did not bury one lie when a second might be useful later. The safe had opened, and now every shadow in it wanted its turn in the light. Judge Hollis took the folder from Samuel. "Where was this?" "Behind the property drafts," Samuel said, flat against the back wall of the safe. "I almost missed it." Thomas Vale stood between the deputies with his coat smoothed and his face calm again. That calm troubled Lydia more than his anger had. Elias noticed. He wanted that one found. Lydia looked at him. His voice was low, meant for her alone. "Look at him." She did. Vale's mouth held the faintest curve. Not happiness, not victory, but the satisfaction of a man who had saved one last card for a losing hand. Judge Hollis untied the red string and opened the folder. The crowd pressed closer, but Mr. Bell lifted an arm to hold them back. "This is court evidence." He said, "Give the judge room." The judge read the first page. His white brows drew together. Then he read the second. Lydia's pulse, which had been steady through the chase and the bank and Vale's hatred, began to beat hard. "What is it?" she asked. Judge Hollis did not answer at once. That silence frightened her. Elias stepped a little closer, his shoulder almost touching hers. At last, the judge looked up. "It appears to be a guardianship petition." Lydia stared for me. "Yes." Mabel gave a soft cry. No, Vale's smile deepened. Judge Hollis continued, voice grave. "Filed but never formally completed. Dated the winter after your father's death. It states that Lydia Mae Whitaker, being unmarried, without direct male protection, and judged unable to manage estate matters, should be placed under legal guardianship for the administration of any remaining property or inheritance." The words moved through the street like smoke. Unable to manage, legal guardianship, male protection. Lydia felt the old room close around her again. Judge, desk, papers, Amos standing too tall. Vale speaking kindly about hard realities. Herself at 20 years old, thin with grief, hands folded in her lap, trying to explain that her father would never sign such a deed, while men looked at her as if sorrow had made her simple. "Who petitioned?" Elias asked. "Knew it." Judge Hollis looked down at the page. "Thomas Vale," he said. With supporting testimony from Amos Granger, Mabel pressed a hand to her mouth. Buck cursed under his breath. Lydia did not move. Amos. Even after all she had learned, the name found a fresh place to hurt. Amos had claimed confusion. He had claimed he did not know the full shape of Vale's plan. Perhaps that had been partly true. But he had still signed a paper saying Lydia could not manage what was hers. He had still helped build the cage, and then acted surprised to find her living in it. Vale spoke then, smooth as river ice. That petition was lawful. Miss Whitaker was a young woman alone, unsettled by loss, unprepared for business. Any responsible man would have considered protection. "Protection," Lydia repeated. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. Vale turned his gaze on her, softening it for the crowd. "You must understand, Lydia, your father left chaos, debts, disputed grazing rights, unstable accounts. You were grieving. Mr. Granger and I acted to prevent ruin. You forged a deed. That has yet to be determined in court. You listed a dead man as witness. An error, perhaps by a clerk. You practiced my father's signature. Vale's eyes hardened for half a heartbeat. Documents can be misunderstood. Lydia took one step toward him. But this one cannot. He looked at the crowd, then back to her. This one shows that serious men had concerns about your fitness to control land. Even if some issue existed with the transfer, it does not follow that a woman in your position was ever capable of holding the ranch. There it was, not the hidden lie, but the oldest one. The one Mercy Crossing had believed long before Thomas Vale put ink to paper. A woman in your position. Lydia felt every eye upon her again. But this time the looking did not make her small. It filled the space around her with all the mornings they had not seen, all the buckets, all the ledgers, all the horses calmed, fences mended, debts calculated, cattle saved from bitterweed, bread baked, wounds wrapped, and storms predicted, while men like Vale wrote the word unable and called it truth. She turned to Judge Hollis. "May I see it?" He hesitated, then handed her the page. The paper was stiff and yellowed. Amos's signature sat beneath Vale's. She knew Amos's hand well. She had seen it on checks, feed orders, and notes left on the kitchen table. There was no mistake. Supporting testimony from Amos Granger, stating that Miss Whitaker lacks sufficient temperament, education, and discipline for ranch administration. Lydia almost smiled at that. Education. Her father had taught her accounts before she was 12. She had corrected Amos's books for 6 years without his noticing, because he did not know enough to see the corrections. Discipline. She had risen before dawn every day in the house stolen from her and kept bitterness from poisoning the work. Temperament. She had set the leg of the man who had signed this. Elias's voice came quietly beside her. "Do not let his paper tell you who you are." Lydia looked at him. His face was steady, but there was anger in his eyes now. The kind held carefully because it belonged in service of something better than itself. "It does not," she said. She turned back to the crowd. "I was 20 when my father died," she said, the paper still in her hand. "Most of you remember that winter. You brought casseroles. You sent cards. Some of you stood at my mother's grave 4 years before that, and at my father's after. You knew me when I was a child, running errands down this very street." Faces shifted. Mrs. Tilden from the bakery lowered her eyes. Mr. Cross from the mercantile removed his hat. Reverend Pike, who had arrived breathless at the edge of the crowd, bowed his head. Lydia lifted the petition. "This paper says I could not manage a ranch." Quote, "Her voice grew stronger for 6 years. I managed it anyway. The crowd stilled. I kept the accounts Amos Granger could not balance. I knew which suppliers would extend fair terms and which would cheat by weight. I treated rain rot, fever, cracked hooves, and colic. I moved cattle before storms. I stretched winter feed. I repaired tack. I kept men paid when money was short by knowing which debts could wait and which could not. I watched the creek, the grass, the fence lines, the mares, the market, and the sky." She looked at Vale. "And while I did that, you sat in your bank with papers saying I was unable." Vale's jaw tightened. Lydia faced the town again. "Ask Buck Larkin, who fixed the gate this morning. Ask Toby, who knew about the bitterweed. Ask Dr. Hensley, who set Amos Granger's broken leg. Ask the county man who carried the deed copy out of the mud. Ask Jonah Reed, who remembered the false witness. Ask Mabel Granger, who kept my mother's locket and brought the truth forward when fear had kept it hidden." Her breath caught once, but she did not stop. "And ask Elias Wade, who came here to buy cattle and was the first man in 6 years to look at my work and call it mine." She had not meant to say his name like that. The street seemed to soften around it. Elias looked at her, and the whole loud, crowded night narrowed for 1 second to the space between them. There was no confession in his face. Not yet. But something deep and honest stood there, waiting with its hat in its hands. Vale broke the moment, touching speech. He said coldly, "But sentiment does not alter legal competency." Judge Hollis folded the guardianship petition. "No, but evidence does. And at present, Mr. Vale, the evidence of Miss Whitaker's competency seems considerably stronger than the evidence against it." A few townspeople murmured agreement. Mrs. Landry spoke from near the steps, pencil racing across her notebook. "That line will print nicely." Judge Hollis looked at the deputies. "Mr. Vale will remain under guard at his residence until a formal hearing. The bank records will be sealed tonight." Vale's face darkened. "You are making a mistake." "No," the judge said. "I am correcting the possibility of one." The deputies led Vale toward the street. As he passed Lydia, he leaned close enough that only she and Elias could hear. "You may win a hearing." Vale whispered, "You will not win the town." People do not like being made ashamed. They will turn on you before they turn on themselves. Lydia met his eyes. "Then, I will survive that too." Elias stepped half a pace forward, and Vale moved on. The crowd began to break into anxious clusters. People whispered, argued, stared. Samuel sat on the bank steps with his head in his hands. Jonah looked hollowed out, but lighter. Mabel stood alone near the alley, clutching Anna Whitaker's empty tin box. Mr. Bell gathered the sealed records into a wagon under the judge's eye. Mrs. Landry sent her pressboy running with notes. By dawn, Mercy Crossing would have the story in print. By breakfast, every ranch road and shop counter would carry Lydia's name. She did not know whether that was good or terrible. Suddenly, she felt very tired, not sleepy. Tired in the old places. The places that had held her upright when no one was watching. Elias noticed, as he noticed too much and somehow not enough to make her feel exposed. "Come sit," he said. "I am fine." "Yes," he said, "you are. Come sit anyway." She should have argued. Instead, she followed him to the low bench outside the newspaper office. The night air smelled of ink, mud, horse sweat, and change. For a while, neither spoke. Then, Elias took a small paper packet from his coat pocket and handed it to her. "What is this?" she asked. Mrs. Landry had biscuits. Lydia stared at the packet, then at him. He looked almost embarrassed. "You did not eat supper." She opened the paper. 2 biscuits, slightly hard, with a smear of apple butter between them. An absurd thing. A small thing. A kindness so plain it slipped beneath her guard before she could stop it. Her eyes burned. "I can face a banker," she said quietly, "but apparently not a biscuit." Elias looked away, giving her privacy without leaving her alone. Biscuits have undone stronger people. A laugh escaped her. It was small, cracked, and real. He smiled then, not fully, but enough that warmth moved through the cold space between them. Lydia ate half a biscuit because her hands needed to remember ordinary life. As she did, Elias leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hat turning slowly in his hands. "My mother ran a small place in Kansas after my father lost his land," he said. "She kept it alive with chickens, sewing, and a vegetable patch no bigger than this bench. Men called it luck when we did not starve." Lydia looked at him. "She died before anyone thanked her," he continued. "I think that is why I noticed you. Not because you needed saving, because I knew what unthanked strength looked like." The words entered her gently. "I am sorry," she said. "So am I." He looked at her. "For your mother, for your father, for every person who looked and did not see Lydia, held the biscuit in both hands." "You saw." "Yes." Why did that frighten me more than Vale? Elias was quiet a moment, because enemies ask less of us than kindness does. She turned toward him. The town noise faded behind them. Somewhere inside, the press began to clatter, metal and ink striking paper with the first shape of morning's truth. The sound rose steady and strong. Lydia looked at Elias's hand resting on the bench between them, not touching hers, near enough to be a question. She placed her hand beside his. Their smallest fingers brushed. Neither moved away. For one breath, 6 years loosened around her heart. Then Judge Hollis called from the bank doorway. Miss Whitaker Lydia stood at once. The judge held up another paper, his face grave. "We have found a sealed note attached to the guardianship file." He said, "It is addressed to Amos Granger. It says that if the Whitaker transfer was ever challenged, he was to remove you from the ranch before you could testify." Mabel gasped. Elias rose slowly, every line of him going still. Lydia's blood turned cold. Judge Hollis looked toward the dark road leading out of town. "Your ranch is not safe tonight." And at that very moment, far beyond Mercy Crossing, a red glow began to rise over the ridge, where Whitaker land waited in the dark. The red glow over Whitaker Ridge did not look real at first. It rose beyond the dark line of hills like a second sunrise, wrong in color and wrong in hour. For one thin breath, Lydia's mind refused to name it. Then the wind shifted, carrying a faint smell into Mercy Crossing. Smoke. Her body knew before her thoughts did. "The barn," she whispered. Elias was already moving. "Horses," Lydia turned to Judge Hollis. "Send the deputies." "I will," the judge said. "Go." She ran for Juniper. The street erupted behind her. Men shouted for water wagons. Mrs. Landry called for lanterns. Samuel Price stumbled to his feet, pale and shaking, but when Lydia swung into the saddle, he ran toward the church bell and began pulling the rope with both hands. The bell rang out across Mercy Crossing, once, twice, again and again, not for worship, not for death, for warning. Elias mounted beside her Lydia. She looked at him. His face was calm in the way a river looks calm before it breaks over stone. "We ride fast, but we ride smart," she nodded. Then they rode. The road to Whitaker Ridge cut through darkness and cold. Juniper stretched beneath Lydia, hooves striking sparks from hidden stone. Elias kept pace on his bay, a shadow beside her, steady as breath. Behind them, other riders gathered, but Lydia did not look back. She could feel the fire ahead like a hand around her throat. The ranch was not only buildings, it was her father's laugh in the stable aisle, her mother's hands brushing flour from a blue apron, the apple tree by the kitchen window, the fence rails Lydia had counted when grief left her unable to count anything else. It was 6 stolen years and 20 years of belonging before that. It was the place that had held her pain because no person had known how. If it burned now, after truth had finally risen, it would feel like the world's cruelest joke. They reached the last ridge and saw the ranch below. Lydia's heart dropped. The barn was burning. Flames crawled up one side, red and gold against the black sky. Smoke poured through the roof gaps. Men ran in the yard, small figures against the blaze. Horses screamed inside. Lydia kicked Juniper forward. Elias shouted, "Lydia, wait!" She did not. The yard came fast. She swung down before Juniper stopped and hit the ground hard enough to jar her knees. Buck was near the well, hauling water with Toby and 2 other hands. Mabel stood on the porch in her nightdress and shawl, holding a lamp in one shaking hand. Amos was on the porch too, propped in a chair with his splinted leg, face gray as ashes. "Lydia!" Buck cried. "The east doors are jammed." "How many inside?" "6 horses." "Maybe 7. Smoke's too thick." Lydia ran toward the barn. Elias caught up at her side. "Tell me what to do." No argument, no command. "Just trust." "The side tack door," she said. "It sticks at the bottom. Kick low, not high. Buck, soak blankets and bring them. Toby, open the north pen gate. Do not stand in front of frightened horses when they come out." The men moved. Again, they moved because Lydia spoke. She wrapped a wet blanket around her shoulders and pulled another over her mouth. Elias did the same. Heat pressed against her face as they reached the side door. Smoke seeped from the cracks. Elias kicked low, once, twice. The wood splintered open. A wall of smoke rolled out. Lydia ducked and entered. Inside, the world was heat, noise, and terror. Flames climbed the far wall near the hayloft. Burning straw rained down in small sparks. The horses pulled at their stalls, eyes wild, bodies shining with sweat. Lydia coughed into the blanket and moved low. "Easy," she called, though her voice vanished in the roar. "Easy now." Elias went to the nearest stall. Lydia caught his sleeve and pointed. "Not that latch. It swells in heat. Lift the bottom pin." He obeyed. The stall door gave. A bay gelding lunged out, nearly knocking them both aside. Lydia slapped its shoulder and drove it toward the broken side door. Outside, Toby shouted and guided it clear. One out. Then another. Then the old gray mare. Smoke burned Lydia's eyes. She knew every board underfoot, every stall, every hook, every place the barn had been patched badly because Amos would not pay for proper timber. That knowledge guided her now. The same invisible knowledge men had dismissed was the only reason she could move inside the burning dark. A beam cracked overhead. Elias looked up. "We need to go. Juniper's colt." Lydia coughed back stall. Quote, "The fire is too close. She is tied short. She will not break free." He looked at her through the smoke, and she saw the fear there, not doubt. Fear, because he understood she would go. "I am with you," he said. They moved deeper. The colt was in the last stall, trembling against the wall, rope twisted around the rail. Lydia reached for the knot, but it had pulled tight. Smoke stole her breath. Her fingers slipped. Elias drew a knife and cut the rope. The colt reared. Lydia caught the halter. "No, little one, not that way. This way. Trust me." A burning piece of hay dropped near the door. The colt screamed and fought. Elias stepped to its side, using his body to block the flame without striking or forcing the animal. "Now," he said. Lydia pulled, not hard, just steady. The colt followed one step, then another. They reached the side door as the hayloft gave a terrible groan. "Run!" Buck shouted from outside. Elias pushed the colt through first. Lydia stumbled after it. The roof beam fell behind them with a crash that shook the yard. Sparks burst into the sky. Elias came out last, smoke blackened and coughing, his coat singed along one sleeve. For one moment, Lydia could only bend forward, hands on her knees, dragging air into her chest. Then she looked up and counted the horses in the pen by instinct. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Buck said, voice rough, "All 7. You got them all." The words should have comforted her. But Lydia was looking at the barn, her father's barn. Flames had taken the roof now. The structure would not survive. She stood with soot on her face, wet hair clinging to her cheeks, and watched another piece of her life disappear into smoke. Then a sound cut through the yard. Mabel crying. Not for the barn, for something else. Lydia turned. Amos sat rigid on the porch, staring not at the flames, but at a man being held between two ranch hands near the woodpile. The man's hat was gone. His coat was torn. One sleeve smelled of lamp oil. Walt Breen. Elias saw him too. His face hardened. Buck shoved Walt forward, caught him running from the back wall with an empty oil tin. The yard fell silent except for the fire. Lydia walked toward Walt. Every step felt strangely calm. "You said it," she said. Walt's face was streaked with dirt and sweat. "I was told to scare folks, not burn horses." By veil he swallowed and looked toward Amos. Amos's mouth opened, then closed. Lydia understood before Walt spoke. "Not veil," she said. Walt looked down. Mabel whispered, "Amos." All eyes turned to the porch. Amos Granger looked smaller in the chair than Lydia had ever seen him. The splint held his leg straight. Pain shadowed his face, but shame, real shame, had finally found him. "I did not tell him to burn it," Amos said hoarsely. Lydia stood very still. "What did you tell him?" Amos gripped the arms of the chair. "I sent a message before you came back from town. Before Belle. Before the bank. before I knew all of it. I told Walt to frighten you off the place if things went against me, to make it look unsafe, to make you leave before the hearing." Mabel covered her mouth. Buck cursed. Toby looked sick. Lydia felt the night tilt around her, not from surprise exactly, but from the last thin hope that Amos's wrongdoing had a bottom. Every time she thought they had reached it, another floor broke beneath them. "You signed the guardianship paper," she said. Amos lowered his head. "Yes, you told Vale I was unfit. Yes, you sent a man to frighten me from my own home." His voice cracked. "Yes." Quote. The barn roared behind them, burning brighter as if the truth itself needed light. Lydia looked at him, this man she had served, endured, argued with, and saved in the pasture. She had wanted his confession. She had wanted the town to see him clearly. She had not expected the sight to feel so heavy. "Why?" she asked. Amos's eyes filled, though no tears fell. "Because I was afraid you would win." No one moved. The simple ugliness of it sat in the yard. At last, Amos looked toward the burning barn. "And because I knew you should." The words struck Lydia harder than his denials ever had. Mabel began to sob. Amos looked at Lydia then, and there was no pride left. "Your father meant for you to have it. I knew that deep down. Maybe not at first, but after a while, after I saw you run the place better than I ever could, I knew. And I hated you for making me know." Lydia's chest ached. Elias stood behind her, close enough that she could lean back if she chose, far enough that the choice remained hers. Amos drew a shaking breath. "I will tell the judge. All of it. The petition, Vale, Walt, what I signed, what I knew, what I let happen." Walt lifted his head sharply. "Mr. Granger!" Amos did not look at him. "Be quiet." Quote. For once, Walt obeyed. The riders from Mercy Crossing arrived then, deputies among them, their horses lathered and eyes wide at the fire. Judge Hollis was not with them, but Mr. Bell was. He took in the barn, Walt, Amos, Lydia's soot-streaked face, and Elias's burned sleeve. "What happened?" Mr. Bell asked. Lydia turned to Amos. For 6 years men had spoken over her. Now she let one speak because the truth belonged in his own mouth. Amos looked at Mr. Bell and said, "I have a confession to make." The fire burned until near dawn. They saved the house, the smaller stable, and the feed shed. The barn collapsed in on itself just before sunrise, sending sparks into the paling sky like 1,000 bright insects. Lydia watched the last wall fall without crying. She was too tired for tears, and too changed to believe that the burning of wood could destroy what the night had proven. When the danger passed, the hands drifted into stunned silence. Walt was tied and guarded by a deputy. Amos had given his first statement, and would give a sworn one in town. Mabel sat on the porch steps, hollow-eyed, wrapped in a quilt. Lydia stood by the water trough, washing soot from her hands. The water turned gray. Elias came beside her. His sleeve was burned, and a shallow cut marked his cheek. She dipped her handkerchief into clean water and lifted it toward his face, then paused. "May I?" His eyes softened. "Yes." She touched the cloth to the cut. He stood very still. The gesture was small, but the air between them changed. Not with heat like the barn fire, but with something steadier. A lantern behind a window. Coffee offered without words. A hand trusted near a wound. "You could have died in there." She said, "So could you." "I could not leave the horses. I know. You came anyway. I know that too." She lowered the cloth, while his gaze held hers. Dawn light edged his face, showing soot, weariness, and a tenderness he no longer bothered to hide. "Because I love the woman who would not leave them," he said quietly. The world went silent. Not truly. Horses shifted. Men spoke low near the ruins. Somewhere a rooster called late and confused. But Lydia heard none of it for one full breath. Love. The word did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like a cup set gently on a table after a long night. Elias did not reach for her. He did not press the confession forward. He only stood there, having placed the truth between them with both hands open. Lydia looked down at the handkerchief, stained with soot from his cheek. "I do not know how to answer that," she whispered. "You do not have to answer it now. I am still fighting for my land. I know, I am angry and tired. And some part of me is still in that kitchen waiting for men to laugh when I speak." His voice was soft. "Then I will wait outside that kitchen until you are ready to walk out." Her eyes burned. This time she let them. One tear slipped down her soot-marked cheek. Then another. Elias did not wipe them away. He let her own her tears, as he had let her own her silence and her courage. Lydia took his hand. Just once. Just for a moment. But his fingers closed around hers with such careful strength that she felt something inside her step away from fear. The sun rose over Whitaker Ridge, lighting the black bones of the barn, the saved horses in the pen, the house still standing, and the people gathered in the yard around a woman they had finally begun to see. Mr. Bell approached with his hat in his hands. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "Judge Hollis will hear Amos Granger's sworn confession at noon. With what we have now, the court may restore temporary control of the ranch to you pending final ruling." Quote. Lydia looked at the burned barn. Temporary control. Her father's land. Her mother's house. A ranch wounded but alive. She slipped her hand from Elias's, not because she wanted distance, but because both of them knew she needed to stand on her own when the moment came. "Then let us go to town," she said. Behind her, Amos spoke from the porch, voice broken but clear. "Lydia." She turned. He looked at the ruins, then at her. "Your father would have been proud." For a moment, anger rose, sharp and old. Then Lydia looked at the horses she had saved, the people who had listened, the dawn over land that remembered, and Elias standing beside her with love held quietly in his eyes. "My father was proud," she said. "You were only late in noticing." She mounted Juniper as the sun cleared the ridge. And this time, when she rode toward Mercy Crossing, she did not ride as a woman begging the town to believe her. She rode as the truth coming home. Mercy Crossing did not look the same by daylight. Or perhaps Lydia was the one who had changed. The town sat beneath a pale winter's sun, its wooden fronts washed gold, its muddy street marked by wagon wheels and hoofprints from the night before. Smoke still clung to her hair and dress. Soot darkened the cuffs of her sleeves. Her eyes burned from the barn fire, and her body ached with the deep weariness that follows danger when there is no time yet to rest. But she sat straight on Juniper. Beside her, Elias Wade rode quiet and steady, his burned sleeve tied with a strip of cloth Lydia had torn from her own apron. Behind them came Buck, Toby, Mabel, Mr. Bell, 2 deputies, and Amos Granger in a wagon with his broken legs stretched before him. Amos looked 10 years older than he had the day before. Maybe confession aged a man. Maybe lies had been holding him upright, and now that they were gone, only the truth remained. People stepped out of shops as they arrived. No one laughed. No one called Lydia kitchen girl. Mrs. Landry's morning paper had already spread through town. Copies lay in windows and clutched in hands, the ink still fresh. Lydia saw the headline as they passed the newspaper office. "Dead witness, named in Whitaker deed." Beneath it, smaller words, "Local woman challenges 6-year land fraud." Local woman. It was not perfect, but it was better than invisible. Judge Hollis held the hearing in the town hall because too many people came to fit inside his chambers. Men stood along the walls. Women gathered near the windows. Ranch hands, shopkeepers, church ladies, freight men, clerks, and farmers packed shoulder to shoulder under the high rafters. Thomas Vale sat at one table with a lawyer brought in before sunrise, his face composed but gray beneath the eyes. Lydia sat at the other table with Mr. Bell, Reverend Pike, Jonah Reed, Mabel, and Elias behind her. Not speaking for her. Behind her. That difference felt like dignity. Judge Hollis entered, and the room rose. When everyone sat again, the wood benches creaked like the town itself was uneasy. This hearing concerns temporary control of the property known as Rose Finch Ranch, formerly Whitaker Ridge. Judge Hollis said, "It also concerns the validity of the deed transfer from Henry Whitaker to Amos Granger and associated parties." Vale's lawyer stood at once. "Your Honor, my client objects to the irregular nature of these proceedings." Judge Hollis looked at him over his spectacles. "Your objection is noted. Your client should have considered regular proceedings before running toward his bank safe in the middle of the night." A ripple passed through the room. Vale's mouth tightened. The judge turned to Lydia. "Miss Whitaker, you may present the evidence in your possession." Lydia rose. For a moment, her knees remembered every old fear. The land office. The judge who had not listened. Amos speaking while she stood silent. Vale smiling as if her life were an account he had already closed. Then she felt the locket in her pocket. Her mother's. She felt the weight of her father's letter, the deed copy, and 6 years of work no paper had ever counted. She laid the evidence on the table. "My father wrote that he had not signed away Whitaker Ridge. She said he warned that one witness on any false deed would be dead, and another would owe money to Thomas Vale. Jonah Reed has sworn that he signed the deed under pressure from Mr. Vale. Church burial records show Peter Vale died before the deed was dated. Bank records show practice copies of my father's signature. Amos Granger has agreed to testify that he signed a petition questioning my ability to manage the ranch and later worked with Mr. Vale to keep me from contesting the transfer." Judge Hollis turned to Amos Mr. Granger. The room seemed to hold its breath. Amos gripped the sides of his chair. Mabel sat near him, face pale and still. For 6 years, Amos had worn pride like a coat. Now he sat without it, and the man beneath looked frightened, ashamed, and strangely human. "I did those things," Amos said. A murmur spread. Judge Hollis struck the table once. Quiet Amos looked at Lydia. "Henry Whitaker did not tell me he meant to give me the ranch. He spoke often of leaving it to Lydia. I knew that. When Vale showed me the deed, I told myself, Henry must have changed his mind because believing that suited me. Later, when Lydia kept the place running, I knew she was more capable than I had ever admitted. I let folks call her dependent when the ranch depended on her." His voice broke. "And last night, before I understood Vale's full part, I had already sent word to frighten her away if the hearing went against me. That led to the barn fire. I did not ask for fire, but I lit the road that brought it." The room was silent. Vale's lawyer rose. "Mr. Granger is injured, exhausted, and clearly under emotional distress." Amos turned on him. "No, sir. I am finally telling the truth." Mabel began to cry quietly. Lydia looked down at her hands. She had waited years for Amos to say those words. She had thought they would feel like victory. Instead, they felt like a door opening onto a room full of dust. Necessary. Painful. Long closed. Jonah Reed testified next. His voice trembled, but he did not break. He told the room about the debt, the false witness mark, Peter Vale's name, and the signature he knew was wrong. Samuel Price testified about the burial records and the locked files in Vale's safe. Reverend Pike testified to notarizing Jonah's statement. Mrs. Landry testified to seeing Vale attempt to enter the bank before the records were secured, and the entire hall leaned forward as if shame had become a shared weather. At last, Thomas Vale stood. He did not confess. Men like Vale rarely gave truth freely. He wrapped himself in careful words, spoke of business hardship, unclear debts, clerical errors, distressed heirs, and frontier necessity. He said Henry Whitaker had been a poor manager. He said Amos Granger had saved the ranch from ruin. He said Lydia's recent success did not prove she had been able to manage affairs at 20. Lydia listened. Then Judge Hollis asked, "Mr. Vale, did you or did you not keep practice copies of Henry Whitaker's signature in your private safe?" Vale's face stiffened. Old records can be misread. "That is not an answer." Vale said nothing. And his silence answered for him. The judge sat back. The whole room seemed to lean with him. After a long pause, Judge Hollis spoke pending full legal review. I find sufficient cause to suspend all claims of ownership based on the contested transfer deed. Temporary control of Whitaker Ridge, including ranch operations, livestock care, and household authority, is restored to Lydia Mae Whitaker until final ruling. For 1 second, Lydia did not understand. The words were too large. Temporary control. Restored. Lydia Mae Whitaker. Then the room erupted. Not wild cheering. It was too serious for that. But a sound rose all the same. A release of breath. A murmur that became applause from the back benches, then from the sides, then from almost every corner of the hall. Buck clapped first among the ranch hands. Toby followed. Mrs. Landry wiped her eyes with an ink-stained finger. Mabel bowed her head over clasped hands. Elias did not clap. He only looked at Lydia with such quiet pride that the applause seemed small beside it. Judge Hollis lifted his hand for silence. Final ownership will be determined after full proceedings. Criminal matters related to fraud, intimidation, and the fire will be handled separately. Mr. Vale will remain under guard. Mr. Granger will remain available to the court. Vale stood very still, all his polish ruined by the plain fact that the room no longer bent around him. Lydia rose. Judge Hollis looked at her. Miss Whitaker, do you understand the responsibility being placed in your hands? Lydia thought of her father's voice. Land remembers. Yes, Your Honor. She said it was already there. The room went quiet again. This time, it was not the silence of dismissal. It was respect. By afternoon, they rode back to the ranch. No one called it Rose Finch on the way. Lydia noticed that. Buck spoke of the north pasture. Toby asked about rebuilding the Whitaker barn. Mabel asked, hesitantly, whether Lydia wanted her mother's flower painting brought down from the attic and placed over the mantel again. Lydia looked at her for a long moment. Yes, she said, I do. When they reached the ranch, the burned barn stood black against the winter sky. The sight hurt. It would hurt for a long time. But the house still stood. The horses grazed in the pen. The apple tree by the kitchen window had lost its leaves, yet its branches remained strong. Lydia dismounted slowly. Everyone waited. That waiting nearly made her smile. Yesterday they had dismissed her words. Today they looked to her for direction. She would have to teach them balance. Respect was welcome. Worship would be useless. Work still needed doing, Buck, she said. Move the rescued horses to the small stable and check every leg for swelling. Toby, count the feed we saved. Mabel, please start coffee. Mr. Bell, I need a list of what the court requires from me before sundown. Elias, he looked up. She paused. For once, his name on her tongue felt less like a risk. Walk with me, she said. They walked past the burned barn, beyond the well, and up the small rise where the old Whitaker Ridge sign had been tossed years ago, behind a broken wagon frame. Lydia had found it once in the early days after Amos renamed the place. She had cleared leaves from it, touched the carved letters, then covered it again, because looking at it hurt too much. Now she knelt and pulled away the dry grass. There it was, Whitaker Ridge. The letters were weathered, but still deep. Her father's hand lived in every cut. Elias crouched beside her. Can it be repaired? Yes, Lydia said. The wood is sound. Then it should stand again. She looked at him. You say that as if you plan to help. Quote, if you allow it, her hand rested on the carved name, and after what? After the sign is raised, after the hearing is done, after the ranch is mine in more than temporary words, she turned to him fully. You have your own spread north of here. I do. You came for cattle. I did. And found trouble. His eyes softened. I found you. The answer moved through her with a tenderness that still frightened her, but not enough to make her step away. Elias, she said quietly, I meant what I told you. I do not know how to be loved without wondering what it will cost. He set his hat on his knee. The wind moved through his dark hair. Then we will go slow enough for you to learn the price is not your freedom." Her eyes burned again. He continued, "I do not want Whitaker Ridge. I do not want a wife who stands behind me while I take credit for her strength. I want to sit across the table from you at the end of a hard day and hear what you saw that I missed. I want to earn a place beside you, not above you." The words settled deep, warmer than sunlight. Lydia looked toward the ranch below. Mabel moved through the kitchen window, likely hanging her mother's painting. Buck led the horses carefully. Toby carried hay with more purpose than strength. Amos sat on the porch under deputy watch, watching the land he had lost begin to breathe without him. Justice had not fixed everything. It rarely did. The barn was gone. 6 years were gone. Her father and mother would not walk down the porch steps to see the sign raised. People who had ignored her would now try to make peace with compliments, and she would have to decide which apologies deserved a place and which were only guilt dressed nicely. But dignity had returned, not given, returned. Lydia took the locket from her pocket and opened it. Inside, the tiny curl of hair still rested beneath the glass. Her mother had kept it safe all those years ago without knowing it would one day find its way back to her daughter's palm. "I think," Lydia said slowly, "I could learn to sit across that table." Elias's face changed. Hope, when held by a careful man, was a quiet, beautiful thing. She reached for his hand. This time she did not let go quickly. He held her fingers as if they were something living and trusted, not something claimed. The wind moved over the ridge. Below them, the ranch waited, wounded and needing work, but hers again in the ways that mattered first. That evening, with the whole yard gathered under a violet sky, Lydia raised the old sign. Buck and Toby set the posts. Elias held the crossbeam steady. Mabel stood near the porch with tears on her cheeks and Anna Whitaker's flower painting visible through the front window. Even Amos watched, silent and pale, as the covered name was uncovered. When the last nail went in, no one spoke. The sign stood straight, Whitaker Ridge. Lydia stepped back. For 6 years she had been treated as a shadow in her own home. Now the town, the ranch hands, the law, and the man beside her all saw what had always been true. She had not become worthy that day. She had only been recognized. Elias stood close enough for their shoulders to touch. "Welcome home, Lydia." She looked at the sign, then at the house, then at the first stars appearing over the land her father had loved and her mother had warmed and she had saved with quiet hands. At last she smiled. "I was never gone," she said. And under the wide Wyoming sky, with smoke fading behind her and lamplight glowing ahead, Lydia Mae Whitaker walked back into her home not as a woman rescued by love, but as a woman whose strength had finally been seen by it.